After Kagaya's defeat, and his subsequent sealing, Madara lost all his chakra, which meant his imminent demise. And so, after a brief conversation with Hashirama, his consciousness was extinguished. A few minutes after his master's death, the Rinnegan in his eyes glowed brightly, beginning to absorb the natural energy and chakra left over from the fight with Kagaya at a terrifying rate. The man's body slowly disintegrated, turning into sand, and a small ball of bright light flew out of the man's chest. Everyone who saw it was shocked, not understanding what had just happened. Unlike everyone else, the eyes of the Sage of the Six Paths narrowed and, after a second of confusion, he rushed after the globe, but before he could reach it, it disappeared into a dimensional rift. After the unsuccessful attempt to catch it, the old man sighed heavily, looked pitifully at the bewildered Cage and Team Number 7, mentally wishing them luck in the face of impending disaster. In an interdimensional corridor. While in the infinite darkness, Madara's body slowly recreated itself with the energy he had managed to absorb before turning into sand. Rinnegan's purple light burned in the man's lifeless half-opened eyes, and a glowing blue orb hovered above his chest, waiting for something. After an unknown amount of time, Madara's body was fully reconstituted, and the glowing ball, which was actually his soul, slowly entered his chest. This time, Uchiha looked like a 20-something copy of himself. Waist-length black hair and a slender, moderately pumped body that would not go unnoticed by the female half. Particularly noteworthy was the pale skin, without a single scar that had been with him since childhood. The pale, velvety skin did not correspond to that of a warrior weathered in 1,000 battles, but belonged to a young man who had never seen hard work under the scorching sun. It could be called a miracle, or a second birth. The power of the Rinnegan is truly unimaginable, capable of reviving the bearer even if his body has turned to ashes. A moment later, after Madara's soul entered his new body, his heart began to race through his veins again. Soon, the young man regained consciousness. His eyes opened, but without realizing where he was, he began to look around, searching for any source of light. Madara activated the Sharingan, but due to the lack of chakra, the dojutsu was quickly deactivated, returning the usual black irises of the Uchiha clan members. For the first 5 minutes there was confusion, and slight panic, but then, he remembered his death. Floating in weightlessness, Madara reflected on what had happened. The last thing he remembered was his conversation with Hashirama, and then the darkness. After a few hours, when his chakra had recovered to an acceptable level, he activated the Sharingan again, but an oppressive darkness still surrounded him. Closing his eyes, the boy thought to himself, relaxing his body completely, apparently this is what hell looks like. Is this my punishment for taking tens of thousands of lives and trying to plunge the whole world into illusion? Damn Zetsu. If it weren't for him, I would have found another way to end all wars. By becoming a 10-tailed Jinchuriki, I could simply watch over the world, and eliminate those who want to start another war. He has been flying in the dark for months now, wallowing in the despair of oppressive silence and hopelessness, contemplating his life over and over again. Withdrawing into himself was the only thing he could do in this situation. He has also been unable to conceive of any real hope for the future, after being caught in the middle of a battlefield in his early childhood, meeting Hashirama and his dreams of a peaceful future, becoming the leader of the Uchiha clan, the death of his brother, the truce, the founding of Konoha, his betrayal in battle with Hashirama, faking his death, long years of isolation and conspiracy, meeting Zetsu Black, and much more. A couple more months passed, and Madara could feel his body's natural energy depleting, suggesting that starvation was imminent. When that time came, it would be a new phase in this lonely hell for the boy. Suddenly, a bright light struck his eyes, immediately snapping the Uchiha out of his thoughts. The light gradually grew stronger until it enveloped him completely, causing Madara to close his eyes and cover them with his hands. After a few seconds, the boy felt the wind on his skin and struggled to open his eyes, frowning at the bright light. As his eyes adjusted to his surroundings, Madara saw a dense rainforest rapidly approaching a couple hundred meters below him. Folding the seal on his hand, he filled his lungs with air, and using his chakra, blew it downward using the wind flow technique. Breaking his fall, Madara created a humanoid Susanoo, and prepared for the fall. Rumble. There was a loud bang in a radius of several kilometers, which chased the beasts away and raised a cloud of dust. When the dust settled, the figure of a young man lay motionless on the ground, staring into the sky. Madara looked up stoically, trying to figure out what the fuck had just happened. I'm supposed to be dead, aren't I? Am I past purgatory, or did I just get thrown out somewhere, on my way to hell? Fully aware that he had made it out of that lonely hell, the boy laughed out loud, sprawled on the floor. His sight, hearing and smell returned, which thrilled him. After a couple of minutes, he sat down on the ground and began to examine himself, feeling that something in him had changed. Soon, Madara was surprised to see that he was much younger, and that all the scars had disappeared, as if he was a completely different body. As the boy examined himself, behind him, an ugly creature, remotely resembling a dog, but with green fur, and dripping green saliva from its mouth, silently approached from behind him. The creature lunged at its victim, but Madara rolled to the left, dodging the attack, and then, with a mighty hand strike, threw the monster aside, striking it in the side. He quickly got to his feet, folded his hand seal and fired 2 vacuum bullets at it, mashing the creature's head to mush. The invisible beast's body jerked some more in convulsions, then froze. Immediately activating his Sharingan, Madara spotted 2 more of the same creatures fleeing from him at full speed. Carefully inspecting his surroundings, the guy approached the monster, but didn't touch it, noticing the familiar viscous liquid on the monster's claws and teeth, cadaverous poison. Probably the creature, a local scavenger. Although the poison won't kill me, the symptoms won't be pleasant, you have to watch out for the local wildlife. Shaking his head, the boy headed in a casual direction to avoid the other creatures, who were attracted by the sound of the fall, and his laughter. 30 minutes later, Madara came upon a small river gushing from the side of a huge mountain, with storm clouds looming around it and huge birds flying. Sensing unconsciously that he would find an adventure on his backside there, he turned away from the mountain and followed the stream, away from that ominous place. Chapter 2, The Hunt. 3 months later, Madara settled near a small lake that was occasionally assaulted by giant white bats, giant spotted spiders and many other local creatures. During his stay in this world, the boy learned that the Rinnegan had not gone anywhere, but it was not possible to activate it for the time being. Thanks to the recharge ability that resurrected him, Madara would not be able to use his most powerful and mysterious dojutsu for years, maybe decades. Furthermore, the Uchiha came to the conclusion that it was thanks to the Rinnegan that he was here, as the eternal Mangekyo Sharingan and chakra volume remained the same. Investigating his surroundings a bit, Madara became fully convinced that it was a completely different world, due to the unknown energy floating around him. He can feel it in his subconscious, but he can't even control it, nor can he feel the full force of the strange energy. There was also a great concentration of natural energy in the jungle, suggesting the existence of both monsters and sentient beings no weaker than him. After a successful hunt 3 days ago, Madara had finally gotten his hands on a garment of a huge flying lizard, with bone spikes protruding all over its body. It was the toughest fight ever in this world. Using the upper part of the Susanoo, Madara knocked the lizard to the ground and then, with great difficulty, cut off its head, striking its neck with the sword no less than 30 times, while fighting 2 other equally crazed lizards that tried to tear the Susanoo's armor with their teeth and claws. From this stout, scaly skin he made himself pants and a long cape, but it was worth it, even though it was very thick and weighed more than 40 kilos. The remaining parts of the creature were made into food, and from the bones were obtained 2 one-handed swords and several kunai capable of piercing the skin of most of the local inhabitants without breaking. The 2 remaining lizard bodies, he sealed in a scroll created from the thin skin of a white bat's wing. Since Madara was not going to stay here forever, he sealed the bodies of all the creatures he killed in the scroll, in case he needed materials and food to survive in this dangerous jungle. Today was a normal day, like any other. As the sun began to set, the boy took one of his swords and went out in search of white bats. Jumping from branch to branch, he soon came upon a pack of huge white wolves, at least 2 meters across and 200 kilos or more. Madara had encountered many types of monsters, and this species was one of the most dangerous because of its incredible agility, sharp claws and effective ambushes. A month ago, in his first encounter with the wolves nearly slashed Madara with their sharp claws, jumping out of an ambush. Only his reaction and experience in such situations had allowed him to escape death, with only a deep cut on his forearm that took 3 weeks to heal. The most dangerous thing was that the wolves waited for their prey sitting high up in the branches, blending in with the white leaves of certain types of plants and trees, and then jumped on their prey from above. Hunting these wolves was a challenge, as it was not advisable to make noise in the jungle. The local beasts would lunge at any rustle, not to mention a couple of cowardly species such as scavengers. Although Uchiha had tremendous strength, he did not have unlimited chakra, and the guy could simply be overwhelmed by numbers, and some creature might even appear that could break Susanoo's armor. As Madara wanted to pass among the wolves, he noticed a newborn wolf cub among the pack, munching on the flesh of a small monkey-like creature. As he watched the clumsy baby, an idea occurred to him: it would be nice to tame this wolf cub. I don't know how long it would take me to get out of this damned jungle, and having a beast with stealth skills on hand would be a good help. Even if I can't tame the wolf cub, I can get rid of it at any time. Realizing that the decision had to be made now, when the wolf cub had yet to open its eyes, Madara stalked up on the branch of a purple tree, 20 meters away from the pack. After a moment's reflection, the Uchiha decided that all the extra hassle of training the wolf was worth it. Climbing silently onto the branch closest to the pack, the boy scanned his surroundings once more with his Sharingan, looking for other wolves lurking somewhere in the area. Finding none, Madara drew his second short sword from the scroll, and as he finished his final preparations, he lunged forward, thrusting hard from the branch. In less than a second, the sword pierced the head of the wolf cub closest to him, and its twin cut the second one in half, and without losing speed, he was the first to cut the third wolf. When his third cousin died, the remaining 5 beasts came to their senses and leapt away from him, but Madara was not far behind. Seizing the moment unexpectedly, Uchiha lunged at the randomly chosen wolf, dodging the pack leader's claws. With another swing, the blade headed straight for the beast's throat and exited through the back of its head. Sensing danger at his sides, Madara released the hilt of the sword, leaving it on the carcass, and leapt to his feet, letting the 2 wolves thrash beneath him with a vicious snarl. At the same time, he pulled a kunai from his sleeve and hurled it at the hind leg of the 4th predator, which was climbing at high speed up a tree trunk to attack him from above. A shriek of pain ran through the area, and the 200-pound corpse fell to the ground with a loud thud, driving the kunai up to the hilt, into its pelvis. At that moment, Madara bent the seal with one hand and swung his sword, sending a wind blade at the leader, leaving a deep wound in his back. Still in the air, the boy used another wind technique to change the trajectory of his fall, dodging the 2 pissed-off wolves below him. Landing on the ground, Madara immediately dropped to his knees and rolled onto his side, bending his wind elemental seals again. Once on his feet, a whole hail of void bullets rained down on the wolves, damaging his tough hide, but nothing more. Seeing that the vacuum bullets were of no use, Madara cursed inwardly, yet decided to finish them off as soon as possible. His Sharingan turned into a perpetual Mangekyo, and the 2 predators froze in place. The Uchiha rushed towards them and, after a swing of his sword, both heads fell to the ground. After scattering them all, the boy took a quick step towards the whimpering wolf against which he had flown the kunai earlier. Without a hint of mercy, Madara plunged the sword into its head, killing it instantly, and then did the same to the leader of the pack, who was on his last breath. Chapter 3: The Journey. 6 months later. After a long stay at the lake, Madara has fully prepared himself for the dangerous journey ahead. 9 months of living in this jungle, under constant threat of being attacked by some unseen creature, had sharpened his instincts to the limit. Around the tree house, he had built a network of seals, alarms and traps capable of making even a giant bat crunch. Moreover, in those 6 months, the wolf cub had grown considerably, reaching the size of an average human, and had long since surpassed Madara in weight, topping 150 kilograms. Though he was large, his mind was still childlike. While the boy busied himself drawing seals and training his rejuvenated body, the wolf, whom Madara called simply White, scampered along the beach with his beloved turtle in his teeth. The pet quickly learned the ins and outs of hunting and teamwork, as these were its innate instincts. In order not to lose the wolf's trust, Madara had gotten rid of the same pack in which he had found it from the beginning, and did not go there again so that the white would not perceive the familiar scent. All adults of the species were pure white, like snow, and the pups were born dark gray, turning white as they grew up. At this time, the wolf's color was ashen, indicating that it was growing rapidly. According to Madara's calculations, the wolf would be pure white in about 6 months, and by then, they should be out of the jungle. Figuring that the wolf cub was already big and strong enough to travel, Madara gathered all his scrolls with the seals ready, and decided to head north to get out of this cursed jungle that was already making him sick. He had even managed to overcome something in his time here. The presence of chakra and healing techniques had saved Uchiha from the dreaded disease, in the process of which his skin had begun to turn gray and harden, but fragile. A day after the appearance of the first symptoms, the boy used a supreme healing technique invented by Hashirama. Thanks to it, the infection quickly subsided and he gained immunity to the disease. To be on the safe side, Madara released his body chakra, cleansing his skin of the infection. As for his location, the guy knew that only in tropical climates such dense jungles were possible. Since he was in the northern half of the planet, as indicated by the position of the sun, the best solution was to head north, hoping to escape the tropical climate. If he had to continue fighting for his life, it would be better to do so in the open country, where danger would not come from every tree and enemies would be visible from afar. Early in the morning, as the sun began to rise, Madara gathered all his belongings and, after releasing the unfortunate turtle into the lake, set off with his pet. 3 months later. It had already been a whole year since Madara had entered this world, and 3 months since he had set out on his journey, with the goal of getting out of this endless jungle. The Uchiha never ceased to marvel at the diversity of the local fauna. 15-meter-long snakes, carnivorous trees that almost devoured white, huge two-headed birds that shot their tongues dozens of meters ahead, giant monkeys, spotted crocodiles and stone golems that inhabited the rocky terrain. Not to mention an even greater variety of carnivores that gobbled up anything that could move. Because of the difficulty of hunting in some regions, Madara fashioned himself a powerful bow from the flexible bone of a two-headed bird and the strong sinews of a giant snake. A normal man would not have been able to shoot an arrow from it, as the force required to pull it exceeded a ton. The arrows, on the other hand, were made of sturdy wood, black in color, and the tips of the sharp teeth of carnivorous fish. In all, exactly 30 of them were made, and each was capable of piercing the thick trunk of a tree. According to Madara's calculations, in all, he had already traveled more than 1,500 kilometers through the jungle that was not passable. The most dangerous of the creatures he encountered was the truly colossal black dragon. This dragon lived on the same mountain that Uchiha had seen immediately after his arrival. Even using the perfect Susanoo, Madara was not sure he could penetrate the creature's skin. A dragon like the lizards he had met 9 months ago was not an easy opponent, precisely because of its protection. What to say about a monster only slightly inferior in size to a tailed beast? Deciding not to mess with it just yet, the boy walked past the giant's lair, noting in his mind the location of such an interesting opponent, in case he wanted to fight a worthy adversary in the future. 2.5 months after his encounter with the dragon, Madara came ashore. Seeing the body of water stretching as far as the eye could see, an unpleasant expression appeared on the Uchiha's face. If there are people in this world, they should build their cities near water. Especially near such large bodies of water. The boy looked at the wolf that was happily running across the sand. Sighing heavily, Madara averted his gaze to the large rock on the right and thought, I'll go up there first to take a look. Maybe I can see something interesting there. So, the boy called White and, jumping on his back, they ran eastward toward the cliff. The wolf had no trouble getting over the rocks and cliffs, even carrying a full-grown man. Soon, White had scaled the nearly 100-meter cliff. Leaping off his pet, the boy stood at the edge of the cliff, gazing out over the endless jungle. Far off to the east, almost on the horizon, Madara spotted ruins that looked like man-made buildings standing peacefully in the middle of the jungle. So there really are intelligent races in this world. I hope they don't look like octopuses or fish-like creatures. A smile appeared on the boy's face, but just as he was about to climb onto the wolf, he heard someone's voices from under a rock. Without much thought, Madara approached the edge of the cliff and looked down in surprise. A boat was moored 20 meters below the cliff, and on it, among large cages, walked what looked like normal people, without gills or tentacles. Ordering White to come down quickly, the boy jumped off the cliff, straight into the boat. Chapter 4. A Lucky Find. Flying down, Madara felt something beside him. Turning his head, he saw a wolf flying behind him to his right, which made the guy first enter a state of stupor and then start cursing to himself, "You dumb dog. I didn't mean to jump after me. There better not be any traps there, you brainless mutt." A second later, using the wind technique, the Uchiha landed softly on the main pole, watching as his pet continued to fall into the water. In the next instant, something large and heavy fell near the boat, drawing all the people on board. While they were distracted, Madara quietly descended to the bottom, listening in amazement to their conversations and shouts, "Damn it! Asterisk 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 did you get the news, Maro, drag harpoons. Asterisk 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 Leviathan asterisk 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 bay. Motherfuckers." Some of the words sounded familiar, but more than half of what was said, the boy couldn't understand, as if they were speaking in a different dialect. As the men drew their spears, Uchiha stopped them from launching an attack on what, though mute, was still his pet. Landing hard behind the crowd, he thrust his sword into the chest of the nearest man holding the spear. The men turned in fright at the sight of the stranger with the terrifying red eyes. The entire crowd froze in place, paralyzed by something mystical. Suddenly, a gurgling sound erupted from the ship's gunnel, and then a huge tentacle hurtled skyward, with a white wolf clinging to it, gnawing at the flesh unceremoniously. With a look of annoyance at the wolf, Madara thrust his blades into the deck, and quickly folded his fingers forming a seal. A man-sized fire dragon flew out of the Uchiha's mouth. Passing over people's heads, singeing their hair, the dragon dug its claws into the tentacle of the unknown creature and then exploded, knocking everyone to the ground. The tentacle broke into pieces, and the largest of them, which still had wolf inside, fell to the deck, crushing a couple of poor people with it. The rest of the men, frightened, began to back away, watching in horror as the huge wolf emerged from among the chunks of flesh. Squinting at White, Madara said reproachfully, as he tossed the lump of meat away from his feet, "What are you doing? I told you to come down, not jump after me, you stupid mutt. Next time, I'll let some creepy creature eat you." The wolf turned his head to the side incomprehensibly, then grabbed part of the tentacle with his teeth and approached the boy with it, and threw the meat under his feet, hoping to be praised. Realizing that he was talking to an animal, Madara thought self-deprecatingly, "What have you come to? Talking to a stupid dog. Just a year ago, I was one step away from world domination, and now I'm talking to an overgrown dog. Is that a communication deficit? I never noticed that before." Then, now calmed down a bit, Madara looked around at the crowd of sailors trembling with fear. The white man also noticed the men standing off to the side, and stepping in front of the guy, he began to growl loudly, preparing to attack them, causing some to even sink into the bath. There was a monster overboard and one of the most dangerous beasts in the jungle, the white mist, was on board. Seeing that they were scared enough, Madara put his hand on the pet's head, and with steel in his voice said, "Sit down. Touch them and I'll throw you in the water, the monster." The wolf obediently sat on its ass with its ears pinned to its head, which frightened the sailors. The Uchiha shifted his gaze to the men, and spoke slowly, so that they could understand as much as possible of what was being said. "Now, this is my ship." The men all looked at each other in horror, apparently realizing what he had said. 5 seconds later, the two men, having steeled themselves, wanted to object simultaneously, but invisible wind blades blew their heads off. An hour later, Madara and the wolf sat at the table in the captain's quarters. In front of them, 14 pirates were kneeling and several more corpses lay outside. One man, with a gray beard and a rotting ulcer on his cheek, was the captain of this ship. Pirates, being the dregs of society, were looters and slave traders. They robbed merchant ships that sailed between the major cities and took the survivors as slaves to be sold later in a slaver's bay. In front of Madara was a detailed map of Essos, one of the 2 continents where humans live. Astapor, the city the pirates were headed for, was an independent port city that served as a stopover point for ships sailing west from Karth. It was run by slave traders who called themselves the Good Masters. The language spoken by the pirates was Valyrian. Madara himself, and the entire shinobi world, also spoke this language, but apparently in a different dialect, which he found truly curious. Fortunately, one of the pirates could read and write, so he would have no trouble updating his vocabulary. Since this ship now belonged to Madara, he immediately decided to go to Astapor, and then think about what to do next. The legendary Uchiha had no goal in mind, which was actually painful for him. Madara needs a purpose to continue his existence. To find it, the guy needs to learn everything he can about the world. World domination or the salvation of mankind no longer interested him. He wanted something new and interesting to dispel the boredom of the stuffy society of weak humans. A few minutes after giving the order, the ship set sail for Astapor. Madara was anxious to get as far away from the cursed jungle as possible. According to the information he had received from the pirates, this continent brought only death to humans, not only because of the dangerous creatures and plants, but also because of the deadly diseases that inhabited it. After sailing, Madara ordered that no one was to enter his quarters until he himself left. The wolf also stayed, as Uchiha feared that his pet would devour all the pirates running the ship. Sitting in his chair and looking at the map, the boy wondered what he would do after visiting Astapor. Chapter 5, Astapor. It took the ship a little over 3.5 months to cross the summer sea, instead of the 2 months it was supposed to take. During the first month, the ship was caught in a storm and washed out to sea for a week. When the ship emerged from it and the sun reappeared in the sky, the pirates discovered that the ship had sailed 1,000 kilometers west of the continent of Sothorios. To prevent the already fragile ship from collapsing in the next storm, Madara had to use Fuinjutsu to fortify it, and another to prevent the ship from capsizing while going through the waves. Also, sea creatures were a problem, but a couple of powerful fire techniques protected even the largest monsters. After using the great destruction of fire for the first time, against a large pack of some creatures coming out of the water, the pirates began to worship Madara as the god of fire, which only amused him. Before the storm ended, the Uchiha had time to learn the modern Valyrian language, and spent the rest of the time learning the so-called common language that was common on the western continent, called Westeros. The common language was known to many peoples, even outside of Westeros, so it would not be superfluous. In his spare time, Madara reconditioned his bow and swords, putting several seals on them, and made 2 more kunai and 10 arrows. The first few days, the wolf felt bad, due to the swing, but the guy's healing techniques brought him to his senses, and then he was saved by the seals. After 105 days of travel, the ship finally arrived at Astapor. When Madara saw the huge city walls, the gigantic golden statue and the tall buildings behind the walls, he whistled, for there was nothing like it in the shinobi world. When they docked at the pier, the pirates pulled the slaves off the ship like docile dogs and led them to the well-known slave trader. The slaves and pirates were followed by Madara, and a contented beast ran off after him. The appearance of the huge white wolf, the size of a horse, caused a commotion on the dock, which the pirates were grateful for. They had not had it easy for 3.5 months. One moment it was about to chew off the head of a crew member, the next it was dragging him around the ship like a toy, and the next it was throwing him overboard, watching him swim in the water. The pirates wanted those around them to understand at least a little of what it meant to be around this wild beast. Before White could escape anywhere, Madara grabbed him by the tail, and pulled him back, next to him. The wolf whimpered, head down, and curled obediently to his left. The men were surprised to see the huge creature, which obediently followed the young man in strange clothes. When the pirates had sold the slaves, Madara took all the money they had received and let them go, leaving them with their lives, and the ship. Walking through the streets of the city, the boy looked at the local sights, and a wolf walked beside him, scaring all the people in its path, with its menacing appearance. The only ones who didn't even move were the black armored guards. Madara was surprised at such resistance, and even thought they were not human, but some sort of zombies, devoid of fear, of how well they had been trained. So these are the flawless ones. I wonder how good they are in combat. Soon, the guy rented himself a big house with a garden, where he and his pet could spread out, which could create trouble in the city just by their mere sight. That was why Madara created an invisible barrier to keep the wolf inside. Before re-entering the city, the boy left him a large piece of spotted boar meat, and ordered him to sit quietly. The white man immediately turned to his meal, completely oblivious to the boy. Annoyed by this, Uchiha kicked him in the ass, but he didn't even flinch, greedily devouring the food. Seeing this, Madara turned around and headed for the exit, muttering something irritably to himself under his breath. An hour later, while walking down the alley of misery where slaves were suspended from crosses, the boy was stopped by a dark-skinned, curly-haired girl in her mid-20s. Bowing to Madara, the girl spoke respectfully, "Master, my name is Missande. Master Krasni's invites you to meet him. He hopes you will accept his invitation." The Uchiha looked at the girl in surprise, then at the slaves around him. "Your master wants to buy me a wolf. It's no use if none of his subordinates can defeat a wolf with their bare hands." Missande lowered her head to him and tried again to change his mind. My master wants to ask you about what is happening in Sothorios. You will not be left with nothing for such valuable information. That is my master's word." After taking a minute to think about it, Madara accepted his offer. "All right, go ahead. I have some questions for your master as well." The girl meekly nodded and asked to be followed. 30 minutes later, Missande led Madara to a small courtyard, which was apparently a reception area. In the chairs at the back of the courtyard sat two people. One was a plump, unassuming man, and the other was a thin, balding man with a neat beard. The girl stood to the bald man's left, and immediately spoke, "I've brought Uchiha-san to see you." Krasni's narrowed his eyes looking at Missande. "I see. Bring that whore who was going to buy the blameless ones." Nodding, the girl took a quick step towards the exit and the man in turn turned to the boy, "So you're Madara. How can a young man like you survive in the jungles of Sothorios, yet tame a white mist? That's quite a feat these days." Madara shrugged, "If you want to live, you will." About the wolf, the hardest part was finding the newborn beast. For the rest of the information, I want to know what is happening now in Essos, and in Westeros, as well as the gold. My information is unique, as I lived there for a year and traveled over 2,000 miles through impassable jungle. I am fully aware of the value of the information. The man's eyes widened, but then a sly smile appeared on his face. "I don't know how you survived there, but the docile white mist that only inhabits the green hell is living proof. Its skin is so tough that arrows and swords cannot touch it, and its claws are so sharp that they can cut through iron with ease. This beast is worth 1,000 flawless ones, but only if it is loyal to me. Unfortunately, that is impossible, because it is already loyal to you." Chapter 6. An encounter with the slave traders. 30 minutes later. Madara spoke briefly of the adventure, deliberately omitting mention of his abilities, and of the huge dragon that lived in the shadowy mountain. When the boy showed a sword made of wyvern bone, capable of cutting steel as well as the claws of a wolf, Krasnis was captivated, and his desire to send an expedition to Sothorios increased dramatically. Now, he knew what to look for. At night, Missande would go to Madara to get detailed information about the creatures there, and how to kill them, as well as bring back gold, and information about Essos and Westeros. She must find a purpose for her future, lest she wander the world idly, like the undead, in search of truth and entertainment. As the boy was about to leave, Missande entered the courtyard, with a white-haired young woman and two men behind her. Both gentlemen appeared to be running errands for the teenager, which merited nothing but Madara's scorn. After a moment's thought, the Uchiha turned to Krasnis. "Who is this girl? She seems to be of noble blood to drag these two." The man shrugged, being in a good mood. "This whore, Daenerys Targaryen, of the fallen house Targaryen, self-styled Queen of Dragons. Seems to me she's a beggar queen who only knows how to sell her ass. She has a small herd of Dothraki and is rumored to have 3 small dragons. She wants her throne back in Westeros, but she won't get it. Baba can't rule even if he has dragons." Madara looked at the girl in surprise and then said thoughtfully to the slaver, "So this girl dreams of being queen. I too wanted to create a world without war, but in the end, after passing over tens of thousands of lives, it turned out to be only a pipe dream. Krasny's looked at him quizzically. A world without war. That's impossible. A faint smile appeared on the boy's face, and with something in mind he spoke monotonously. It is not so impossible. One day, humanity itself will reach a level of development where wars will disappear as a type of conflict in itself. In any case, I think so. They both froze in surprise, and Madara, realizing that he had blurted out his thoughts, decided to change the subject. Do you mind if I stay to hear what he has to ask? Maybe I'll learn something interesting. In exchange for the favor, I will sell you a dagger made of wyvern bone. It will come in handy on your next quest. Throwing out words beyond his comprehension, Krasny clapped his hands, pleased by the unexpected deal. Well done, it's a pleasure doing business with you. The Uchiha handed the sword to Missandei, who immediately took the blade to the slave traders. Krasny and then Grazdan took turns examining the oddly shaped dagger, which had runes engraved on it. Looking away from the dagger, Grazdan asked in surprise, "What is that? Is it some other language?" Madara shook his head. It is a phrase, in an ancient language, meaning, blade, nothing more. Putting it aside, Krasny waved his hand, giving the floor to Daenerys. After receiving permission, the girl stepped forward, and immediately began with the main thing. In common language, I want to buy all the Unsullied from you. Missandei translated her words to the slave trader, which made the latter not a little surprised. All of them. She can't afford them. That whore thinks she can get anything if she comes here and waves her tits in front of us. Missandei changed her answer slightly to make it sound acceptable. There are 8,000 flawless ones in Astapor. Do you want to buy them all? Daenerys replied firmly, with a glance at Madara. Yes, as well as those still in training. Missandei translated her words to the slavers. Unhappy with the girl's last words, Grazdan turned to Krasny. If they do not prove their worth in battle, Astapor will fall from grace. The bald man looked at Missandei, instructing her to translate. Master Grazdan cannot sell untrained boys. If they fail on the battlefield, Astapor's honor will be tarnished. Daenerys responded firmly, giving an ultimatum to the two slave traders. I will take them all, or I will take none. Many will die in battle and the boys will pick up the swords of the fallen. Shaking his head in disappointment, Krasny said, the whore does not have enough money for all. Missandei began to translate his words, tweaking the content a bit. For her ship I'll give a flawless 100, no more, and only because I like her ass. Your gold is enough for another 10. Even 25, since I'm in such a good mood today, thanks to my dealings with Madara. Missandei continued to translate, while the Uchiha himself listened to them with a small smile on his lips. The boy realized that he understood Valyrian, through his sign language, as he spoke to the slave traders. This discovery only piqued the interest of Madara, who wanted to know exactly what this girl was up to. Soon a question arose. Master Krasny wishes to know how you are going to pay for the remaining 7,870 that have not been repaired. Daenerys replied in the same calm and proud voice, I have dragons. I will give you one. The slavers looked at the white-haired woman in surprise, and Daenerys' companions began to change their minds, but she only gave them a look of disgust, and stepped forward, continuing her negotiations. Krasny tried to negotiate with her, starting with 3 dragons, but all to no avail. Finally they agreed on one, the largest dragon. Before leaving, Daenerys looked at Missandei and said, I will take you too. You will be my gift from Master Krasny, as a token of a good deal. With a bit of hesitation, the girl translated what she said, which made the man get a strange look on his face, but he agreed anyway. Things were going as well as could be expected. Getting unique information about Sothorios, getting a weapon that could defeat even the strongest monsters on the continent, and getting a dragon that had enormous combat power. All that was left was to raise it and make it obey his every command. Madara watched it all, with an almost imperceptible smile. Apparently she's not as smart as she thinks she is. For trying to tame a dragon, he will be burned himself. Walking behind Krasny's special guests, Madara inexorably watched the girl's back, thinking about how he was able to tame dragons. It was very difficult, for even he had difficulty with a wolf, and Daenerys was but a weak human, unable even to defend herself. Chapter 7. A small conflict. 3 hours later. With Sothorio's information already copied onto the scrolls, waiting to be exchanged, Madara was sitting in the grass under a tree, sharpening a new bone kunai to replace the old one. Full of flesh, the huge wolf lay to his left, panting intermittently. Judging by White's state, he had no intention of getting up any time soon. Suddenly, Madara turned toward the entrance, sensing that uninvited guests had entered his territory. A few seconds later, about 40 impeccable men emerged from behind the house, with 2 knights and Daenerys in the lead. Sighing, Madara set the billet aside, waiting for something interesting to come up. As they approached, the Unsullied surrounded the tree, along with the boy and the wolf. Daenerys cast a glance at the sleeping wolf and then spoke confidently as the soldiers pulled something from their pouches. "Uchiha Madara, Missandei told me about you. She said you are a strong warrior who has tamed a ferocious beast." The boy looked around at the impecunious ones and then at the girl and her 2 knights. His gaze stopped on the small dragon that flew over the head of the group. "I guess Krasny's is dead. What are you doing in my house, girl?" The girl stared at Madara for a few seconds and then waved her hand. Flawless quickly extended a steel net to catch the big game, and threw it at White. Snapping its eyes open, the wolf tried to jump on its paws, but the more it moved, the more it became entangled in the net of nets. Seeing the pet's uselessness, Madara muttered in disappointment, "The useless dog. I should have left you in the jungle. You only eat me." The 2 knights looked at each other, and Daenerys was speechless at his calmness in such a situation. Sighing, Madara took another look at the little sky dragon and then at the girl. "Well, what about my golden information? You didn't think I'd be scared of a lizard and some weaklings, did you?" Observing his demeanor, both knights instinctively sensed something was wrong, as he was far too calm in the situation. Daenerys was no fool, so she kept a distance of 15 paces. "You'll have it all if you join me and prove your usefulness. Bend the knee and after I ascend the throne, you will receive lands, titles and gold." Listening to the girl, Madara was surprised at her naivety. "Kneel down. To serve you. Incredible self-esteem. Perhaps they have built a temple in her honor as well. I once knew a man with a phenomenal ego, but it didn't last long." Ignoring his insulting words, the girl spoke, looking at the chained wolf fluttering about. "I heard from Missandei that you lived in Sothorio's for a year. That tells me you are a skilled warrior, able to survive even in the most dangerous places in the world. Those skills can help me conquer the Iron Throne." Madara stood up and a short sword fell from his sleeve, right into the palm of his hand, causing Daenerys to take a quick step back and the 2 knights unsheathed their swords, covering her with them. "There is no one in this world before whom I can kneel. I suggest you give me the money and information Krasny's promised me. Your useless army can do nothing to me." After his words, Madara threw 3 kunai with his free hand at the heads of the 3 flawless men who were at the wolf's will. The 3 soldiers fell dead, and the Uchiha himself broke the chains with a smooth sword motion, freeing the beast. The Unsullied immediately attacked Madara, but they had no chance of survival today. Taking a quick step to the side, the boy thrust his sword into the quarter's neck and, with a powerful jerk, decapitated it. With unpredictable movements, Madara dodged the impeccable blades, immediately counter-attacking. 1 step, 1 dodge, 1 sword strike, 1 kill. From the outside it looked like the guy wasn't fighting, but dancing, constantly spinning on his axis. In just 5 seconds, 7 soldiers lost their lives, and as they began to retreat, gathering in a fighting formation, Madara simply leapt over the first row of Immaculates, finding himself back in the middle of the crowd with his Sharingan activated. The wolf finally broke free of his chains and joined the fray as well, charging into the enemy lines like a tank, effortlessly scorching the soldiers' helmets and breastplates with his sharp claws. The 2 knights quickly led the girl towards the exit, seeing how quickly the Immaculates were dying. After running 50 yards, a sea of fire erupted in front of them, blocking their path. Daenerys looked in surprise at her dragon, who had a 3-tomo Sharingan burning in his eyes. "Drogon, what are you doing?" The dragon ducked a few feet lower, showing with all his appearance that they would not pass. One of the knights, Jorah, stepped between Daenerys and Madara, who had almost finished carving up the Unsullied. The other, Boristan, stood on the other side, protecting her from the rampaging dragon. After a moment, the last Unsullied was killed by the wolf, and the beast was about to lunge at the last trio, but Madara's strong arm pushed its head against the ground. The target tried to break free to continue the kill, but the guy just pushed harder, burying his head up to his ears, no more. The wolf whimpered, and a few seconds after the order, it calmed down, stopping its kicking. Releasing the groaning beast, Madara stood up and calmly walked towards the remaining three, bloody sword in hand. Due to the streak of fire, and the dragon scowling at them, the knights were unable to secure Daenerys' escape from this courtyard. Stopping in front of Jorah, the boy glared at the dragon with his Sharingan, and it obeyed the command and flew towards him, landing beside him. Madara began to look at him with interest, and then touched him to temper his curiosity. Both the men and the girl watched in amazement as the boy touched the obedient dragon without any trouble. There was a deadly silence. Soon, Madara looked at Daenerys, causing her to flinch involuntarily, and said coolly, "Well, what about my gold and my information? If you don't give me what Krasny's promised me, you will die right here, along with your lackeys." Chapter 8, The League of Assassins. Sitting on the bench, the boy watched with boredom as the nervous Daenerys and Jorah glanced from time to time at the pile of corpses 50 yards away. Borristan turned to Missandei to tell her to prepare what Krasny's had promised Madara. The wolf sat behind his master, not taking his eyes off the dragon sitting obediently at the Uchiha's feet. The girl couldn't wait, so she asked, dispelling the oppressive silence, "Why does Drogon obey you? Are you of the Targaryen bloodline?" Madara looked at the dragon and then back at Daenerys. "Targaryens. So your bloodline helps you control dragons. That makes sense, and explains a lot. I don't belong to your bloodline, and I can't control dragons like you. In my case, this lizard has no chance of escaping my control." The girl clenched her fists and gritted her teeth angrily, "So it didn't really attack us willingly. So you're some kind of sorcerer. A normal man can't fight like that, let alone bend a dragon to his will." Letting out a quiet laugh, the Uchiha replied to pass the time for a while, "I didn't use anything but my body to kill these wimps. Have you ever heard of martial arts? Just because you can't do anything doesn't mean everyone is like that." Daenerys fell silent, but this time Jorah spoke up, "A man can't move like that." Madara gave him an irritated look and then turned to the girl, "How long?" He was interrupted by a quiet rustle about to be heard. The boy swerved to his right just before a dagger stabbed into his back, simultaneously activating the Sharingan. With a jerk of nearly 5 meters, Madara dodged 2 more of the same blades, noticing the dark blue-robed men sinking into the shadows. "What's that?" Suddenly, a shadow blurred under the guy's feet and, in the next instant, a thin black blade emerged from its shadow, aimed directly at his head. Snorting, Madara grabbed the blade with his fingers and pulled sharply upwards. When the assassin's head appeared on the surface, he kicked it hard. Slam! The head exploded like a watermelon in a mush of brains, skull fragments and blood splattered on the ground in front of him, staining Daenerys and Jorah's clothes. The sight made the girl uncomfortable, but she was able to restrain herself from retching. The rest of the assassins returned to the shadows, hiding their presence. Sensing that nothing was over yet, Madara intercepted the dead assassin's sword, and activated the Eternal Mangekyo. What interesting guys. They sure have a lot of useful stuff. 5 seconds later, one of the assassins tried to attack from behind, but before the sword could reach its target, his master was hit by a powerful genjutsu, and after another second he completely lost consciousness. After knocking down one of his attackers, the boy repelled an attack from the left and then from the right with his sword. Leaping backwards, Madara grabbed the unconscious man by the neck and threw him aside a couple of dozen meters to avoid being killed by his own, in an attempt to hide information about him and his organization. The rest of the assassins hid in the shadows. Smiling broadly, Uchiha folded seals with his hands and then shouted, hitting the ground with them, "Earth element, earth spikes." The ground rippled, and in the next second, hundreds of spikes erupted from it, piercing everything in a 20-meter radius, excluding the girl and her SMERD, and the dragon and the wolf. From the spikes hung 6 twitching assassins, clad in dark blue robes. Some of them were still alive, but with severe wounds all over their bodies, it was obvious that they would die in the next minute. Madara looked around carefully, but finding nothing, he straightened up. The spikes returned to the ground, leaving only a few pierced bodies. Sighing, the boy turned off the Sharingan and approached the surprised duo. Pushing Jorah aside with a flick of his hand, the Uchiha grabbed Daenerys by the neck and asked menacingly, lifting her off the ground, "Who is it? Did you send them here to kill me?" Clutching her hand, the girl did her best not to choke. "No. No. I don't know who they are." Barely squeezing out the words, she felt her conscience clinging with the last of its strength not to extinguish itself. Sensing that she was not lying, Madara tossed her aside, moving towards the unconscious assassin. Falling heavily to the ground, Daenerys struggled to gulp for air as she tried to catch her breath and tears sprang to her eyes. After regaining consciousness, Jorah quickly ran to her, beginning to check the girl for injuries. At the same time, Madara was bringing the last surviving mage to his senses. Touching his head, the Uchiha injected some of his chakra. The man's eyes snapped open, but meeting the guy's gaze with his Sharingan, he plunged back into Genjutsu, at which point the interrogation began. "Madara, what's your name?" The assassin answered in a monotone voice, "Thomas Graham." "Madara, who are you?" "Assassin, an elite shadow assassin." "Madara, what organization do you belong to?" "Assassin, the League of Assassins." "Madara, where is this League of Assassins located?" "Assassin, Westeros. King's Landing. The catacombs beneath the Red Keep." After a moment of reflection, Madara asks the ultimate question, "Why did you attack me, and if you were hired, who did it?" 10 minutes later. Uchiha paced back and forth, glancing from time to time at Daenerys, who was sitting on the ground. "So you didn't really send them. Remember that if you try to send assassins to me, you'll end up much worse than them. In this world, no one can protect you from me." With that said, Madara turned his gaze towards Missandei, who had entered the courtyard, along with a few impecunious ones, and a second knight. After receiving the gold and the books with information about Essos and Westeros, he handed over the scroll with information about Sothorios, as he had promised when making the deal. Chapter 9. Curious Information. After Daenerys gave the golden information to Madara, she hurried to leave, remembering to order the Unsullied to retrieve the bodies of their fallen comrades. Left alone with the last assassin, the boy took from him 3 poison daggers, a slender short sword and a purple rectangular token with an unknown hieroglyph. Leaving the assassin with only his pants, the boy pierced his heart with his sword, then took the weapons and tokens from the other assassins. After collecting the loot, the Uchiha bent some hand seals. A ripple passed through the ground, and in the next second, engulfed the bodies of 8 men from the League of Assassins. Finishing with them, the boy sat down in the gazebo and began to read notes about what was now happening on the continents, as well as some of the mysterious places she knew about. 3 hours later, Madara had discovered many things. There was something very interesting going on in Essos, namely an abnormally large movement of sorcerers. The reasons were unclear, but it was known that they had been activated a little over a year ago. Hundreds, if not thousands of sorcerers had been spotted in various parts of Essos and Westeros. People who encountered them said that these fanatics were looking for some sort of global calamity, a god descended from the heavens, or someone who posed a threat to the god of light and magic in general. This information alerted Madara, as these rumors were too suspicious. "I wonder if they are looking for me. I came to this world at that exact moment, right, and the way. Some sort of prophecy perhaps. That would explain the attack by the League of Assassins." Suddenly, the eyes of the Uchiha's Great One flashed. "Stop. They were looking for someone to threaten their god. Doesn't that mean there are gods in this world? If gods can be threatened by someone, then they must be mortal. Damn, this is getting interesting. It would be interesting to fight some god, but only when the Rinnegan returns." Excited by the idea of fighting gods, Madara didn't pay attention to what was going on in Westeros, but headed straight for the mysterious places, to see what's there. Edge of shadows. Ghostly grass covering the whole world. Nothing particularly interesting. Next. Yin, a ghost town located in Sothorios. Killing everyone with unknown magic. Stone faces on Stonehead Island. After 20 minutes, Madara finished reading, but finding nothing of interest, he put the handwritten book aside for later. Nothing interesting at first glance, but still worth a look. Until I know more about magic, I won't go into ghost towns that kill everyone who enters. I think I need to deal with the League of Assassins first. From them I can learn about magic, and many other things. Scratching the back of his neck, the Uchiha looked thoughtfully at the sleeping wolf. I'd hate to see this fool get slaughtered by assassins while I'm gone, so I'll have to take him with me. Sighing, Madara headed towards the exit of the rented mansion. I have to go see the girl so she can assign me a ship to King's Landing. On my way to Westeros I will find out how to find the League. Judging by the distance, it will take me about 2 months to sail. First, a year in the fucking jungle, then 3.5 months at sea, now a 2-month voyage again. That's not going to work. We have to think of something to speed up the trip. As soon as the Uchiha stepped out of the door, he immediately noticed 3 men guarding the entrance. One of them almost immediately fled somewhere, leaving his 2 companions to continue spying. A sly smile appeared on Madara's face and he disappeared right in front of the 2 spies, using a body blinking technique. The 2 men panicked and started running like mad, questioning people along the way. At the same time, Madara followed the spy who was running somewhere, moving stealthily across the rooftops, not out of necessity but simply out of boredom. Soon, the spy led him to a villa on the outskirts of the city. There were guards all around the compound, and outside the house itself, numbering over 50 men. With his Sharingan, he was able to distinguish 10 people. 6 maids, Missandei, Jorah, Boriston and Daenerys herself. While the maids cleaned up, the 4 were in the large work office on the 2nd floor. A minute after arriving on the scene, a spy came running into the room, and falling to his knees said something, causing everyone to tense up. Suddenly, a creaking sound was heard on the side of the door. Everyone immediately turned their heads that way, but there was nothing there. With a heavy sigh, Daenerys waved her hand at the spy. You may go. Join the others and keep an eye on him. Report everything he does. The man bowed and quickly left. Jorah spoke first. My queen, I doubt this man means you harm. He could have killed us before when we were in his courtyard. Boriston nodded. I think so too. He might even have taken his dragon, but he gave it up without any demands. He seems to see us as some sort of buffoons to entertain him. Bowing weakly, Missandei inserted her word. Uchiha-san is a very strange man. He seemed to be interested only in information, not power or money. Even Krasny's-san, with all the army he had, ordered his slaves not to anger him and do whatever he asked. With another sigh, Daenerys turned back to the table to take something from it, but suddenly, her gaze stopped on Madara, sitting in the chair behind the table, with an impenetrable expression. After a few seconds, the 2 knights also noticed him and immediately reacted by drawing their swords. Ignoring them, the Uchiha addressed the girl. Because of your antics with Krasny's, the ships don't leave the harbor. Find me a ship, I'm leaving for King's Landing in a couple of days. I don't care who they are, pirates or merchants, as long as they sail to King's Landing. For a few seconds, the girl stared at him. Unclenching her fists, trying to calm herself, she replied, Why would you want to go to King's Landing? You can't destroy the League of Assassins by yourself. Madara, I'm not interested in your opinion. If you don't find me a ship, I will turn your entire army of slaves and dragons to ashes. I have heard that dragons are invulnerable to fire. Let's see if they can resist my flames. The whole quartet looked at him dumbfounded, and Daenerys asked almost immediately, looking at the knights, So, are you some kind of powerful wizard or sorcerer? Even if you are, you can't defeat the whole army, along with the dragons. Madara smiled, I am neither a mage nor a sorcerer. Don't insult me with such petty titles. Decide what you are going to do. Will you give me a ship and crew, or will you try to attack me? I promise I will not kill you before your army is destroyed. I will even let you go and allow you to command my slaves. I'll take either one. Chapter 10. Preparations for sailing. After hearing him finish, Daenerys looked at Madara with incredulous eyes. If you are not a mage, then what are you? How can you use magic? Madara smiled quizzically, and turned his hand sharply to the side. Behind him, a huge blue Susanoo hand formed on his left side. In the next instant, a rumbling sound was heard and the front wall of the house was knocked down by a huge skeleton-like hand. Two knights quickly stepped in front of the girl. Khaleesi, back off. Ignoring them, Uchiha spread Susanoo's arm wide and said, "Girl, I have no problem destroying your army, so it's in your best interest to find me a suitable ship and crew. If you think an army of 8,000 can do anything to me, you're sorely mistaken." Daenerys lowered the swords of the two men so as not to provoke Madara and asked, "All right, I will find you a ship and crew. After that, will you leave Astapor and never threaten me again?" The boy nodded in satisfaction. "Apparently you're not as bad as I first thought. You managed to suppress your fear of something unknown. Maybe you have the backbone of a ruler after all. Tomorrow afternoon, come see me. I have some questions for you about the giant dragon I saw in Sothorios. You know a lot about these lizards, don't you?" Looking at Madara in surprise, Daenerys thought, first threatening and now praising. "I can't understand what he really wants from me." Suddenly, the girl's eyes widened and she asked in surprise, "Wait, did you say dragon? Are there dragons in Sothorios?" Rising from the chair, the guy said, addressing the whole, "We'll talk tomorrow afternoon." Immediately after his words, he disappeared, leaving the surprised girl and the two wary gentlemen alone. Skipping across the rooftops, a whirlwind of thoughts swirled in Madara's mind. "I need to become stronger." After meeting Utsutsuki Kagaya, the existence of other gods no longer seemed so delusional. If this god of light really is targeting me, then I need to make myself as strong as possible. Maybe he's limited in some way, like Kagaya, so he has to use assassins. Either way, I need to keep myself busy with something. I could try to master Hashirama's Sage Mode. I probably won't be able to use the wood element, but I can improve my physical strength, vitality and regeneration. Besides, if I can use natural energy that can harm even a 10-tailed Jinchuriki, I can probably harm a god as well. I doubt the god of light is some kind of immortal entity like Shinigami or Jashin. He looks more like that weird darkness guy the first met on my home world. Incredibly strong, but deadly. After a couple of minutes, he reached his courtyard. Sitting under a tree, Madara immediately began to meditate, trying to feel the natural energy. Thanks to his incredible control and experience with natural energy, reaching the wise mode was much easier for him than for others. However, he still had to learn to sense and absorb natural energy, which was difficult in this world. 18 hours later. Even after 18 hours of meditation, Madara could not sense even a strand of natural energy. Means that I will have to find a place, such as an ancient forest, where the concentration of natural energy is much higher than in other places. Apparently, I'll have to find one after dealing with the League of Assassins. Fastidiously tapping the tree, destroying half of the trunk with it, the Uchiha stood up and looked up at the sky. "Looks like I've been sitting here all night and morning. So Daenerys should be arriving soon. I wonder what the future holds for me. I might even be able to return to the shinobi world. But no, first I have to kill the bastards who ordered me to. If that goddess is involved, it'll be a lot more fun." Sighing, Madara went inside to get something to eat. After a couple of hours, Daenerys and Missandei entered his courtyard, while the two knights stayed outside, on the girl's orders. At that moment, Uchiha was sitting on the lookout, working on a seal that would reduce the friction of the water on the surface of the ship, allowing it to move much faster. Seeing them, Madara put the brush and paper aside. "Have they found the ship?" The girl shook her head negatively. "Not yet. There are no manned ships in the harbor going to King's Landing. Right now a crew is being recruited for a ship from the slave traders." Tapping his finger on the table, Uchiha said, "You can end the recruitment, just find me a cartographer who can sail the sea. Those who have already signed up for the team will sail with me. I will complete the missing team myself. I don't have time to wait, I'm sailing tonight." Daenerys looked at the boy in surprise, sensing something was wrong. Sailing without a full crew is suicide. "What's the hurry? Madara, tell me, what is your faith? How much do you know about the god of light?" At such a sudden question, she was taken aback. "What, my faith? My religion is faith in the seven. Why do you want to know that? In Essos they believe in the god of light. He is also called Reglor and the Red God. As far as I know, he is a god of fire. In the free cities they believe in him, but what does that have to do with anything?" Tapping her finger on the table, She continued, "You've heard of wizards searching for someone in both Essos and Westeros, haven't you?" Daenerys replied, surprised by this attention to the rumor, "Yes. It seems to be some kind of prophecy, but I don't know the details, only rumors. They were looking for some god descended to our world that might threaten their god." Madara nodded, "I think these fanatics are looking for me. Most likely the League of Assassins is with them as well, since they attacked me the same day I arrived in Essos. I was nowhere to be seen and I did nothing to attract anyone's attention. These assassins are from King's Landing, which means they have been looking for me for at least 3 months. Attacking a stranger with no bounty on their head makes no sense, I tell you from experience. I've never been to Essos or Westeros, but they know about me somewhere. Maybe it was the wizards who did it." The girl was speechless as she listened to his reasoning. After a while, she said, "If so, you'll have to hide until you get to the root of this problem. Mages and sorcerers must have a head, as they act in a coordinated manner." Suddenly, the Uchiha raised his glowing red eyes. "I am not afraid of the wretched wizards. I doubt that any of them can pose a threat to me. The main danger is the God of Light himself. If he attacks me personally, I doubt that I can survive with my present strength." Chapter 11. Back on the road. After a brief conversation with Daenerys, Madara learned from the girl that, according to Valyrian lore, dragons had lived on Essos for a long time. There are theories that their original home was in Sothorios, but for some reason, they had migrated north. Finally, Uchiha made her a tempting offer. "Girl, I have a tempting offer for you. From what I understand, you are going to spend a few more years on this continent. It is inevitable that you will come in contact with people of power. If you learn anything interesting about wizards, or where they reside, then I will help you take over Westeros. Of course, the level of my help will depend on the value of your information. If you provide credible proof that the God of Light exists, or where the chief wizard is, with my help, you will have your throne in less than a couple of days." Daenerys looked at him incredulously. "What makes you so sure that the God of Light exists? It's not even clear if these fanatics are after you specifically. Maybe the assassins attacked because of your wolf, or maybe they just mistook you for someone else." Sighing, the Uchiha replied, "Of course, there is the possibility that I was attacked for something else. I'll soon find out from the League of Assassins itself. As for the God of Light, I saw a couple of gods a few years ago, so I have no doubt of their existence. The main thing is to distinguish between people's fantasy and real gods. If Arglor exists, and he's really targeting me, then I can't just stand idly by." After a moment's thought, the girl stood up from the bench and said, before walking towards the exit, "If I have the opportunity to investigate the sorcerers, I will. I have seen their power for myself. I admit that their help will be as significant as that of an adult dragon, if not more." Before leaving, Madara added, picking up the brush again, "You have not seen a tenth of my power, keep that in mind when you gather information. Later, I'll find you myself, so you don't have to bother. I'll be out of reach for months." Daenerys paused for a few seconds, looking at him quizzically, then nodded, "I'll send Missandei to take you to the ship within the hour. The crew will already be on the ship fully ready to sail." Finishing, the girl left, while the Uchiha himself continued to create the seal system. An hour later, just as Madara finished tying the seals into a system, Missandei approached the gazebo and said, "Uchiha-san, everything is ready. When you are ready, follow me." The guy rolled up a scroll of seals and put them in his inside pocket. "On the way, show me a place to buy tools and materials for forging weapons. Also, I need paper, ink and clothes. Guide me to the stores where these items can be purchased. Afterwards, we will go to the ship." The girl bowed obediently, to which Madara said irritably, shoving a book of his Fujitsu notes into her hands, "Stop bowing, it annoys me. Hold this, I need to wake up the wolf." The girl nodded quickly and followed him into the house. As she approached the wolf sleeping on the porch, the boy kicked him in the side, making him squeal and pop on his paws. "Stop sleeping. All you do is eat, sleep and shit." As if realizing what he had said, White lowered his head with his ears pinned back and slowly followed. 2 hours later, Madara stood in front of a large and apparently new ship, painted white. There were 20 people standing on the deck. Missandei waved her hand at the ship and said, "The ship is called Dawn. Krasny's bought it from a wealthy merchant, from Mir, paying 300 without blemish. The crew is nearly equipped and ready to sail. The captain's name is Morgan Gregory." The Uchiha nodded at his words, "Good." Calling the wolf after him, the boy made his way to the deck, where he was greeted by the surprised eyes of the crew. Sighing, Madara said, addressing the cabin, "If you don't touch it, it won't hurt you. We can sail to King's Landing. Don't bother me until I leave the barracks myself." With a slam, the door behind the Uchiha closed. At Madara's command, the wolf sat down near the door, proceeding to guard it. The sailors looked at each other, hesitant to move, under the gaze of the huge beast. Suddenly, Captain Morgan spoke, bringing them to their senses. "Stop standing there. You heard Mr. Uchiha, the wolf won't hurt us, so everyone has started their duties. We're sailing." The entire crew dispersed around the ship, assuming their duties. Meanwhile, Madara had been adjusting the seals to fit the dimensions of the ship. An hour and a half later, when they were about 15 kilometers away, the boy emerged from his cabin, a scroll unfolded in his hand. Seeing that he was outside, the captain approached him and said, "Lord Uchiha, my name is Morgan Gregory. Lady Daenerys has appointed me captain of this ship, saying that we are to take you to King's Landing in Westeros. After that, the ship will become my property, with her permission. The journey to your destination will take you at least 2 months." Madara looked askance at the man and then surveyed the deck of the ship. "I don't need the ship, you can have it. Tell everyone to get up on the rail, there's something I need to do." Although Morgan looked quizzically at the boy, he ordered his subordinates to come down from the deck. The bosun and the sailors, "Quickly get up to the rail. Whoever touches the deck with his feet, go overboard." All the sailors, following the captain's order, quickly left the deck, followed by Morgan himself. Then, the Uchiha looked at the beast and pointed his hand at the mast. The wolf, obeying the order, released its claws and leapt at him, starting to climb the mainsail smoothly. When the deck was completely free, Madara looked once more at the scroll with his eternal Mangekyo, then bit a vein in his hand. Blood gushed out. When a small puddle formed underneath, he folded the seal with his left hand and tapped the cover with his right. Thousands of black symbols began to braid the ship like magic ivy. The blood also began to move, linking the various seals into a complex system of seals, making them act like clockwork. After a dozen seconds, when the seals enveloped the entire ship, the symbols flashed blue, indicating activation, and then turned black again. Chapter 12. Encounter with the Monsters of the Summer Sea. The next morning. Waking up early in the morning, the first thing Madara did was to go out on deck to replenish the chakra of the ship's seals. When he saw the Uchiha, Morgan approached him. Towards him, and greeted him enthusiastically, "Good morning, Uchiha-san. Thanks to the spell you have cast on the ship, we should reach King's Landing in only 10 days. However, I'm afraid the strain on the ship could cause it to collapse. It is not designed for such speeds." Pulling his hand away from the center of the seal, Madara replied, looking for the wolf, "Nothing will happen to the ship, I've already taken care of that. Better tell me, are we going to have any dangerous areas where the monsters might inhabit?" After some thought, the man answered confidently, "No. I'm steering the ship on a safe course. The only thing that could give us trouble are pirates in a sudden storm." Finding the wolf asleep on the bow of the ship, Uchiha shifted his gaze to the captain. "Well, if something serious happens, you tell me. Pirates or monsters won't be a problem, but a storm might delay us. I'll be busy in my quarters, so don't distract me for anything." The man nodded quickly and Madara looked back at the wolf and called out, "White, come here." The beast raised its head abruptly. Seeing its master, it rushed towards him. The Uchiha took out a scroll, and making a swipe with his hand, pulled out a piece of meat from some kind of beast. When the wolf saw the food, he immediately grabbed the piece, which weighed at least 20 kilograms like fluff, with his teeth and carried it to the bow of the ship, where it was made into a rockery. The Uchiha wanted to return to his quarters to continue working on the new weapon. Suddenly, the ship shook violently and, in the next second, huge tentacles came out of the water. Surrounding the ship, the tentacles began to braid around it, but the fortification seal prevented the ship from folding like a house of cards. Slashing at the tentacles with his sword, Madara made his way to the ship's rail. The terrified sailors rushed out of the hold, cutlasses, harpoons and knives at the ready. It's the Kraken. Damn it, why did it attack us? As they tried to cut off the tentacles, Madara looked out to sea, using the Sharingan. A dozen seconds later, the boy shed his cloak and dove into the sea, forming a Susan around him. He could fully see the huge body of a gray octopus as it plunged into the water. The tentacles began to attack Madara, but the blue energy sword tore them apart like a sharp grassy scythe. A bloody mist hovered around him, making him lose sight of his opponent, but it was hard to miss such a large target. Grabbing one of the tentacles with his Susan hand, Madara approached the monster. Approaching within striking distance, he lunged. The sword had no trouble piercing the huge monster and splitting it in two, but right after, something big and strong dug its claws into its side. The creature's teeth pierced Susanoo's armor, punching several holes. Raising his right hand, Madara created another sword and stabbed it into the creature's back. Where did they come from? I doubt they attacked of their own free will. Wizards again. Suddenly, another creature clawed at Susanoo, then another. Gritting his teeth, the Uchiha folded the seal with his hands, and said smugly, beginning to form the perfect Susanoo, pathetic bugs. A flash of chakra caused all the monsters and the bloody mist to scatter to the sides. The water Madara was in flew upwards like an explosion, but luckily the boat managed to get far enough away to not get trapped. A few seconds later, the perfect Susan was completely stable. Spreading his huge wings, the titan grabbed the hilt of his katana and, with one swift motion, split a pair of giant sea serpents in half. Immediately afterwards, Madara flapped his wings and flew out of the sea at breakneck speed. With an annoyed look at the snakes trying to bite his Susanoo legs, he stretched his arm down, and began the creation of Yasaka Magatama. On the boat. As Madara jumped down, the sailors grabbed their weapons and began slashing at the tentacles, but from the outside they looked like harmless pinpricks. The most effective was the wolf, which chewed through the tentacle as if it were soft jelly. After a while, the tentacles stopped moving and slid into the water, freeing the boat. With a sigh of relief, Morgan turned to his subordinates. Uchiha-san gave us a chance to leave. Let's sail a few kilometers and wait for him. I'm sure he knows what he's doing. 2 minutes later, there was an explosion and all the sailors watched in fright as the huge winged giant, the size of a mountain, flew out of the water. Everyone who saw it backed up a few steps and some fell on their asses, and the captain was no exception. Pointing his finger at the giant, Morgan shouted, "God! Has a god himself come down to our world?" Suddenly, the blue titan extended his hand downward and 3 oblong spheres of energy formed in front of his palm. Fully formed, they hurtled into the sea at great speed. Explosion. A powerful explosion, comparable to a volcanic eruption, erupted just below the giant, causing huge waves, but the ship passed through undamaged. Wiping out all the monsters in a single blow, Madara flew towards the ship. In a matter of seconds, after traveling just over a kilometer, the Susanoo landed in the water near the ship. At the sight of the huge humanoid creature, whose feet were the size of a ship in the vicinity, the sailors fell to their knees, beginning to pray. The Uchiha watched this amusing situation, inspecting the water below him for other monsters. After a while, sensing that his chakra supply had dropped by 40%, he jumped off Susanoo's forehead crystal and landed on the deck of the ship. As the men looked on in astonishment at the unharmed boy, Susanoo's huge body crumbled. The shinobi himself wondered why he was being attacked by such a large number of powerful monsters. It is impossible for these creatures to live in the same area. It is unnatural. Concluding that the wizards were definitely behind this, Madara made his way to the steps where his cloak was. Picking it up, he noticed that most of the cloak was stained with octopus blood. Snorting, the shinobi averted his gaze to Morgan, and said, "Stop sitting idly, get to work." The sailors rose from their seats as if their lives depended on it, and stretched themselves into threads. For his part, the captain quickly pulled himself together and began to issue orders, still in a trembling voice. Madara glanced down at his stained cloak and then back up at Morgan. Holding it out to the man, the Uchiha said in an orderly tone, wash the blood off the cloak, and don't bother me until I come out myself." Chapter 13. King's Landing. 12 days later. Dawn had come at last to King's Landing. Due to a storm in the narrow sea, the ship was 2 days late. It was only because the ship had a Fuinjutsu sealing system that it was able to reach its destination in only 2 days. Otherwise, it would have taken at least a month, as was the case near Sothorios. As Dawn approached the dock, Madara activated the Eternal Mangekyo, searching the rock beneath the castle for any caves or crevices that could serve as entrances to the League of Assassins' hideout. In order to examine everything in great detail, the Uchiha sent extra chakra to his eyes. The rock that was almost a kilometer away was now as if it was right in front of his face. After 10 minutes of looking around, Madara only found a couple of signs, in the form of a Chinese dragon devouring itself. Not sure if it was left by the Assassin League, but he still has to check. If there's nothing there, I'll search the castle. There should definitely be a couple of entrances to the shelter there. As they sailed toward the dock, Captain Morgan approached the boy, bowed respectfully and said, "Mr. Uchiha, we've arrived. Do you have any other orders?" Examining the buildings and people on the dock, Madara replied, "Stay here. If I'm not here in 3 days, then you can set sail. If you hear any explosions, return to the ship and set sail immediately. If I need to, I will catch up with you. If not, swim wherever you have to go." The man nodded, "As you command, Lord Uchiha." A few minutes later, the ship docked and the sailors laid the wooden bridge from the ship to the dock. Leaving the wolf on the ship, Madara made his way to the cliff where the majestic red castle stood. After taking a few steps along the dock, the guy disappeared. Using the glow technique, he moved in a matter of seconds to the very spot where the small palm-sized signs had been drawn. There are no caves or even cracks in the rock. After examining the other side of the rock as well, Madara returned to the ship. Appearing right in front of Morgan, surprising him with this, he said, "The wolf will stay here for now. He can't show his face in the city until he finds the League of Assassins." Madara activated the Sharingan, and used Genjutsu to knock White out. The wolf fell to the deck with a thud, and the guy added, "He won't wake up until tomorrow morning, so cover him with something. People mustn't see him." The man bowed to the boy, and immediately ordered Uchiha's orders to be carried out. Several sailors pulled a spare sail from the hold and covered the beast with it. At the same time, Madara brought out a new weapon from his quarters, a large bone scythe, with steel parts. Placing it on a scroll, the boy pulled out a short bone blade, fully perfected and no longer resembling a primitive man's weapon. He was not afraid of wizards, or anyone for that matter. Only that if he faced a troublesome opponent, he could easily smash a few buildings, causing unnecessary commotion, and probably alerting the League. Pocketing his crafting inventory on a scroll, Madara made his way into the city. Just outside the gate was a large market where merchants sold their wares. The guards wore armor that covered the front of their bodies, chainmail on arms and legs, and a steel sword at their waists. The dark yellow cloak stands out above all, probably symbolizing gold, or perhaps the sun. At the entrance to the city, Madara was stopped by the guards. Purpose of arrival. "How long do you intend to stay in the city?" After a moment's thought, the boy replied, "I am here to sell some goods from Essos. I will stay here for about 2 or 3 days until I make a deal with the local merchants." "Guardian, what exactly is it that you are bringing to sell? I also need your first and last name." Madara smiled faintly, playing his role. "I am Uchiha Madara. I brought a rare beast from Sothorios, as well as silk from Essos, and some unique swords made from wyvern bone. I think the wealthy locals will be very interested in them." The sentry looked at him in surprise. "Sothorios? Is that a little studied land in Essos? I've never heard of them. I've never heard of wyverns either." "Madara, Sothorios is a little explored continent beyond the summer sea, so it's no wonder you've never heard of it. These lands are plagued by monsters, so their exploration has been abandoned." "About the wyverns. Well, they look like dragons, but they can't breathe fire. Anyway, big-winged lizards. I was lucky enough to get a couple of bones from travelers, and decided to make a unique weapon out of them to sell. It's so strong it can cut through steel without Dama." That unaccustomed friendly tone made the Uchihas sick. "How pissed off I am with those bastards. If it weren't for the fact that the League of Shadows might hide if he made a fuss, he would have been unceremonious and headed straight for the castle. Still, he should have sneaked in instead of going through the front door." The guard's eyes widened at such interesting information, but seeing that a queue had already begun to form, he rubbed the back of his neck and said with a smile, "You may pass. If we happen to meet again, I'd like to know more about Sothorios and those wyverns." "Of course, if you don't mind." Madara smiled quizzically. "Of course. If fate wills, I will tell you about Sothorios." However, the Uchiha's thoughts were exactly the opposite. "You'll be very unlucky if we meet again." Entering the city, Madara's expression turned cold again. Turning his head, he headed in the direction of the Red Castle. Halfway there, the boy noticed an oddity. The main street was almost half full. Evidently it was not normal, but that played in Madara's favor, because if he was already known by sight, it was much more difficult to spot the guy in the crowd. Chapter 14. The Red Castle. Walking down the wide street leading to the Red Castle, Madara contemplated how to find the entrance to the League's lair. When he looked at the cliff, he could clearly feel the empty space behind the 5-meter-thick rock. He could have had no problem breaking through it and getting there directly, but he left that method as a fallback, deciding to proceed more delicately. To begin with, Madara could destroy the rock at any time, along with everyone in and on it, but that wasn't his goal. The Uchiha wanted to capture the head of this branch alive, to find out everything he was interested in about him. The head of the League of Assassins branch knew much more than the high-ranking leaders of the branch itself. This is inevitable in such an organization. Information was the main asset of these organizations, and a leak could be fatal to it. Uchiha knew this from his own experience. 30 minutes later, Madara arrived at the great stone gate that separated the castle from the rest of the city. Although the gate was open, it was guarded by at least 10 guards. As he approached, one of the men stopped him, standing in front of him. "Good afternoon. Your invitation." Immediately after his words, the Uchiha's eyes turned Sharingan, and all the guards froze. Frightened eyes darted everywhere, not knowing what was wrong with them. Immediately after, Madara kept walking, without any trouble. 150 meters away there was a second gate, but there the guards let the guy pass through smoothly, hardly paying him any attention. At close range, the castle looked as huge as the nine-tailed fox. There were also guards at the entrance of the castle, asking for an invitation to people they didn't know. Just like last time, the guards stood transfixed, unable to lift a finger. Due to the fact that there were now only a few people in the courtyard, the strangeness of the guards should be noted after the head of the League of Assassins branch had been captured. The main hall that received the guests at the entrance was quite large. It probably occupied a quarter of the entire castle. It had been designed to hold many people in case the city gates fell. Walking through the hall, Madara reached the corridors. After going through the entire first floor, the Uchiha still couldn't find an entrance, which was starting to piss him off, but before proceeding with Plan B, he decided to check the second floor. As he climbed the stairs to the second floor, he was stopped by 2 knights in golden armor with white cloaks on their backs. "The king has an audience." Without finishing listening, Madara plunged them into genjutsu, then opened the large wooden doors, into the royal hall. There, seated on the throne, was a teenager of about 15, with an older man beside him. Hearing someone enter, they both turned toward the entrance. Seeing the stranger, the boy shouted at the Uchiha, "I told you not to let anyone in. Get out of here." Ignoring him, Madara reached the middle of the hallway and stopped, starting to look around. Annoyed at not being heard, the young king rose from his throne. "Are you deaf? I said go away. Guards, take him away and throw him in jail." Even after his words, no one appeared, which caused the man to frown and hold out his hand in front of the teenager. "Shut up and back off, Joffrey. Can't you see there's something wrong?" The man then turned to Madara. "Who are you and what are you doing here?" The Uchiha paid no attention to him, and kept looking for something. Getting no answer, the man began to back away, pinning the young king behind him. Suddenly, a smirk came over Madara's face. "Come out, I see you." From the shadows, men dressed in dark blue robes began to emerge, a thin short sword in their hands. Then, about a dozen men in gray robes also appeared from behind the Uchiha. A man in dark blue robes approached and asked, "Have you come to destroy us? You must be the god of illusions they told us about." Madara cocked his head in surprise. "A god of illusion? Who told you such nonsense?" The man merely shook his head, not believing his words. "We were warned that you are good at manipulating people. We, the snake branch of the League of Assassins, have already accepted our death. My subordinates and I have only come to deliver a message from the head of the League. You will not be able to do what you set out to do. No matter how many lives have to be sacrificed, we will destroy an enemy rich in light." Madara, "So your god is such a coward that he is afraid to come before me personally. Instead, he sends his slaves. Apparently I overestimated him." None of the assassins responded anything to his words. Instead, they held their swords and daggers to their chests and thrust them hard, piercing their hearts. Madara watched it all with a faint smile. Suddenly, everything around him began to change. The assassins were back in place, unable to move. Madara walked calmly towards the boss among them. "Did you really think you could die without my permission? From the beginning you all fell for my illusion. It would have been difficult for me to catch you if you had decided to run away. Fortunately, you underestimated me, thinking you could die whenever you wanted to. So I have some questions for you." The man's eyes widened in fear, realizing that they had made a grave miscalculation in not committing suicide as soon as they learned of Madara's arrival in the city. Approaching the man in charge, the boy asked in a calm tone, "What's your name?" The man, trying to suppress the urge to answer, spoke haltingly, unable to contain himself. "My name, Mason Davis. My code name, Night Serpent." Chapter 15. Cowardly King. As Madara asked Mason what interested him, the young king and the old man lurked near the throne, observing the situation from the sidelines. Shifting his angry gaze from the Uchiha to the man, Joffrey asked, without risking raising his voice, "Grandfather, who are these people? How dare they ignore me, the king?" The man who called himself Tywin Lannister replied irritably, suppressing his urge to strike the stupid boy, "Shut up. This is no time for your antics." Joffrey merely gritted his teeth, but said no more. Half an hour later, Madara was almost finished with his almost inconclusive interrogation. After a brief deliberation, he asked one last question, "Tell me, Mason, do you want to live? If you swear an oath to me, you and your men will stay alive. All you have to do is help me find the main branch of the League of Assassins, and the main sorcerers who serve our glore. After that, you will be free to go." The man clenched his fists and replied firmly, "I, and my subordinates, have been prepared for death from the beginning. The League of Assassins will never betray their own. Do what you must." For a few seconds, Madara gazed at the confident expression of a man willing to accept death. Sighing, trying to suppress his irritation, the boy nodded, and drew his bone sword from its sheath. "If that is your choice, then die." Each of the assassins buried their eyes, beginning to pray in a language unknown to Madara. A second later, the Uchiha disappeared, and the next moment, reappeared in the same place. Simultaneously, all the assassins fell to the ground, with a hole in their chest. With a sigh, Madara picked up Mason's black-crowned skull token and finally turned his attention to the two subdued men near the ugly throne. "You two, come here." Joffrey's eyes widened, and he looked quickly at his grandfather, but there was no fear on his face. Grabbing his grandson by his clothes, Tywin silently dragged him behind him, though he resisted, and shouted, "No. I will not go. It's an order from the king. Let go." Suddenly, the man stopped and slapped him so hard that he almost fell down. The boy's legs buckled, but Tywin's strong arm kept him from falling, dragging him further. Standing before Madara, the man bowed respectfully and said, "Sire, what do you want?" Ignoring the grumbling king, the Uchiha asked, "I am looking for a place in Westeros where no human foot has ever set foot, and where nature reigns supreme. Do you know of such places?" Thinking briefly, Tywin replied, "The only thing I can think of is the permafrost lands beyond the wall." Madara, "That's it. Tywin, those are the only lands in Westeros that are uninhabited. The rest of the places have already been scouted, and I can't guarantee they're empty." The boy thought for a moment, remembering the map of Westeros. Sighing, he turned and headed for the exit, but before leaving, the Uchiha said menacingly, "If your soldiers try to cause me any trouble, you'll regret it." Having said all he wanted to say, Madara left. As he left the room, Tywin released Joffrey, looking at the 36 dead elite assassins. Struggling to get to his feet from shock, the boy began to shout in a rage that sounded more like a pig's squeal, "How dare you strike your king? Enough of living." The man looked at his grandson with irritation and replied firmly, "By your behavior, we both could have lost our lives. This man has killed more than 20 elite assassins in the blink of an eye. He is a powerful sorcerer who could have killed us, and he had no trouble getting out of here. We have nothing to answer to him. Good thing the circumstances were such that he left, we're very lucky." Joffrey clenched his fists in anger, but there was nothing he could say to Tywin. Shaking his hands in helplessness, he walked quickly to the ugly throne. The man stared at the bodies of the murderers. He noticed that each corpse had a single wound where the heart was. A moment later, a dozen knights rushed into the room, swords drawn. Seeing the pile of corpses, Tywin examining them, and the young king sitting on the throne with a scowl, a royal guard named Merin gestured to the other guards, giving the order, "Aris, Baylor, Osmond, check the corpses. There may be survivors here. The rest of you, disperse in the hall. Ensure the safety of King Joffrey, and the hand." The knights quickly dispersed, proceeding to carry out the sub-commander's orders. Merin himself approached Tywin and asked, "Sire, what has happened here?" The man turned to the knight and replied sternly, "Sir Merin, forget what you have seen here. The same goes for everyone else. Remove the equipment of the dead and bury them secretly from the others. This is an order from the king." The man looked in surprise at Tywin, and then at the corpses, not knowing what exactly had happened here, nor what all this secrecy was for. One thing he knew for sure. He should know no more than he was supposed to, seeing the behavior of the king and the hand. At that moment, Madara was heading for the cliff wall. After all, he decided to check the lair of the League of Assassins. Although he was sure that Mason had destroyed everything that could be more or less useful, the Uchiha still wanted to check it out. Anyway, it wouldn't take much time. There was a garden with a fountain and a gazebo near the cliff. As he approached the garden, he was stopped by one of the two knights, blocking the way with his right hand, the other resting on the hilt of his sword to scare him. "Stop. Ordinary servants are not allowed here." Madara raised his eyebrows in surprise, not expecting to be mistaken for any servant. With a hard blow to the chest, the guy threw the man backwards a few meters, crumpling the man's steel shield. The heavy impact, and the hard landing, caused all the surrounding servants to turn towards him. The second knight tried to reach for his sword, but Madara prevented him, striking him in the helmet with the back of his hand. The knight's 120-pound corpse flew nearly 5 meters away, flipping twice in the air in the process. Falling heavily, it never moved again. Anyone who saw it was sure that after such a blow to the head, people didn't survive, even if they had a helmet. Out of annoyance at not being able to find out the location of the main branch of the League, Madara kicked the first knight in the chest once more as he tried to get up. The man's body flew another 6 meters or so like a rag doll. Chapter 16. The Real Threat. After taking care of the guards at the entrance, Madara made his way to the end of the garden, an annoyed expression on his face. "Bitch," he erased his memory with magic. 10 days of going around in the sea to kill a few lowlifes but getting little to no useful information. I hope there's at least something useful in her lair. Near the terrace, 2 young girls were standing, talking about something. Suddenly, they heard a noise in the garden. Interested, the redhead and her maid wanted to see what was going on, but one of the 2 knights who had been assigned to the girl held out his hand in front of her, stopping her. "Lady Sansa, wait." Suddenly, there was a loud bang and, a second later, the knight's body broke through the decorative wall separating the garden from the terrace. 2 royal guards immediately stood in front of the girls, pointing their swords at the young stranger. Without even thinking of stopping, Madara stepped over the man's unconscious body, heading for the terrace. After getting the Uchiha close enough, one of the knights charged him, directing a slashing attack at the intruder's shoulder. As the sword almost reached Madara, the boy raised his hand and, with a sharp movement, snapped the blade. The man staggered from such a sudden jerk and, in the next instant, a piece of the broken blade plunged into his temple. Facing him without breaking stride, the Uchiha threw the corpse away from him. Passing by the frightened girls and the blood-soaked knight wielding his sword, Madara jumped silently to the terrace, looking for something below. As the stranger was distracted, the knight silently waved a hand to the side, indicating for the girls to leave, but they didn't even move. Seconds later, the young stranger jumped down, causing them to catch their breath. There was silence, but a few seconds later there was a deafening explosion, which shook the terrace so hard that it began to crumble. Both girls fell to the ground, but without getting confused, the knight shouted, lifting the redhead and her maid to their feet and dragging her away, "Lady Sansa, quick, you've got to get out of here." Leaping down, Madara landed on the very ledge where one of the posters of the dragon devouring itself had been drawn. The Uchiha bent a few seals and then touched the rock with his hand. The hard rock turned to sand and scattered into the water, revealing a passageway to the lair of the League of Assassins. Activating the Sharingan, Madara slowly made his way inside, trying to detect the activation of magical traps, if there were any. As soon as he entered the lair of the League of Assassins, more than a dozen small white stones illuminated the entire room at once. Not expecting anything good, Madara's eyes turned into an eternal Mangekyo, and Susanoo's ribs began to form around him. Before the whole room was flooded with bright light, the guy managed to scan it with his eyes. Explosion. A deafening roar went through the entire royal harbor and part of the rock began to crumble. A mighty jet of fire erupted from Aegon's Hill, sweeping half the bay, turning several ships and people to ash in the process. In addition to the fire, a small patch of blue flames flew off the cliff. Landing in the water, it froze. Madara looked irritably at the shattered rock, but with a little less than before. Before the explosion occurred, Uchiha noticed a large sign on the wall that was different from the rock outside, at least some clue about the main branch. And about that trap. How I hate magic. If that chakra trap had worked, I would have disarmed it before it exploded. I feel like I'm going to be in serious trouble in the future because of my lack of information about magic. The flame that destroyed the lair was so hot that it turned the cave into a lava lake. Did our Glor do it too? After scattering the partially destroyed Susanoo, he turned his gaze to the white ship that had sailed from the city. Sighing, Madara leapt several hundred meters in a single powerful leap, landing easily on the deck of the ship. As soon as he appeared, all the sailors looked at him in awe. Morgan quickly approached the Uchiha and, after bowing slightly, asked, "Sir, where are we going now?" "We are at your beck and call." Madara glared at the man angrily, "Stop sucking up to me. I can't stand sycophants. I am now on my way to the land of eternal winter. Get me as close to them as you can. After that, the ship is yours." After some thought, the man replied, "The farthest place we can take you is White Harbor. Further north, the coast is dotted with underwater rocks and floating blocks of ice. Without knowing the route, we'll just sink the boat. White Harbor is about 500 kilometers from the wall. Beyond the wall is already the wilderness of eternal winter. At the speed this ship is sailing, we will reach White Harbor tomorrow morning." Madara briefly thought about the man's words, 500 kilometers. That's about 2 days. Perhaps I can learn something about the League of Assassins during my journey. In that case, we should visit the big cities. There is profit to be made from this, but if I am discovered by the League members, they will immediately erase my memory. Sighing heavily, the Uchiha replied to Morgan, heading to his quarters to do some crafting, "So be it. Steer the ship to the White Harbor." After the boy's last words, the cabin door closed. Turning to his crew, the captain said in a loud voice, "You heard the master. Get to work. Next destination, Puerto Blanco." The sailors scattered like ants throughout the ship as they began their tasks. The captain himself turned to the helm. At this moment, in an unknown place in Essos, on a high cliff that separated land from sea stood an ancient castle that looked more like ruins than a once grand building, where sat the king of a race long gone. There was such a powerful and oppressive aura around the castle that any unsuspecting person found there could lose their life. On a throne in a room that was missing a wall and part of the ceiling sat a gray-haired old man, with a pair of twisted black horns on his head. On his shoulder and chest showed a huge wound that would not stop bleeding. The old man was missing his left arm, as well as his left leg. In front of the old man were two humanoid creatures kneeling, with the same horns. One of them addressed the old man, "Lord Mammon, that mortal was seen on a branch of Ouroboros. That branch no longer exists, nor do the demon stones that were to be placed throughout King's Landing." The old man gritted his teeth, turning the armrest of his throne to dust. You beggars. You said the sea monsters would take care of an alien. You have 1 month to kill him. If you interfere with my plans, I'll take your souls first." The two humanoid beings bowed respectfully. "We will not let you down, Master Mammon." Then, they exited the royal hall, leaving the old man alone. Mammon gritted his teeth in rage. "How have I, the great archdemon Mammon, come to have a mortal critter dare to interfere with me? First that boy almost killed me, and now a mortal dares to spoil my plans. Men, I will soon consume you and restore my power." The old man's last words were so loud that they could be heard many tens of miles away. Chapter 17. The beginning of the fun. The next morning, the ship arrived at White Harbor without any problems, unlike the last trip. When Madara stepped off the ship, all the sailors followed him. They formed a long line and bowed in unison, awkward as they were, and Morgan said, "Sir, we wish you luck on your future voyage. We will remain at White Harbor for another 3 days to stock up on goods. If you need anything, we are at your service." Madara looked at all the men and, flashing a faint smile, replied, "Agreed. The spell will last a month or so keep that in mind. I may need you again in the future." All the sailors took another bow, and in one voice wished him good luck. Madara, along with the wolf, headed down the road around the city. 1 day later. In 1 day, Madara had traveled a little over 120 kilometers. In the end, due to the wolf's limited endurance, they covered less than half of the planned route, spending the night near the Lamb's Brow Hills. In the morning, they set out again, heading for the Lone Hills. When the Lamb's Lips Hills were behind them, the Uchiha encountered a large troop of soldiers, numbering approximately 2,000 men. This entire column was moving between two rocks that could have been a good place for an ambush, but apparently they did not care at all. Madara did not want to give himself away, as that could have ended in an unnecessary slaughter of weaklings, and just wanted to wait for the long column to pass. Unfortunately, not everything went as planned. Seeing the large crowd below, the wolf jumped onto a rock and howled loudly, for some unknown reason. Uchiha immediately rushed towards the beast and, with a mighty yank, knocked it back behind the rocks. "Stupid dog. Open your fucking mouth." The wolf groaned as it crashed against the rocks, but Madara didn't mind at all. What bothered him most was that the platoon's march had stopped. After a couple of minutes, the guy heard the quiet footsteps of people approaching from different directions. Judging by the footsteps, there were a dozen of them. "Then we'll have to change our plans." Throwing a look of annoyance at the wolf, the Uchiha picked up a few rocks from the ground and jumped 5 meters. Instantly locating all the targets, Madara threw the rocks hard precisely at the soldiers' heads, decapitating them. 12 bodies simultaneously fell to the rocks and rolled in the rubble. Seeing this, the squad leader shouted in a loud voice, "Zasada! Shield, to the first line. Archers, get ready." The squad quickly stirred, and in just a couple of dozen seconds, the defensive formation was ready. A moment later, a young man stepped out from behind the rocks, a menacing bone scythe over his shoulder. Behind Madara came a giant white wolf, the size of a horse. A murmur of confused soldiers' voices echoed throughout the formation. Suddenly, the squad leader put his arm in front of him and shouted, "The lights, the fight." As the last word escaped the man's lips, the metallic sound of a fallen bowstring was heard. 100 arrows flew toward Madara and his wolf. With a snort, the boy ran towards the group at high speed, readying his battle scythe. Before the first arrows hit the ground, the Uchiha was already in front of the soldiers. With one mighty blow, he severed 5 heads, cutting through the chain mail as if it were cloth. Immediately after the blow, he kicked the decapitated soldier in the shield, knocking several dozen more soldiers to the ground with his body. After the blow, a giant wolf flew over Madara's head, landing right in the middle of the crowd. The guy rushed after the beast, slashing soldiers left and right. Seeing them being cut down like grass in a field, the commander gave the order, keeping his distance from Madara. Distance. Don't get in each other's way. The platoons of soldiers began to stretch out, giving themselves and their comrades free rein to use their swords and spears. By now, more than 50 men had died at the hands of Madara and the wolf's claws. Seeing that the efficiency had fallen, the boy turned and with all his might hurled the scythe into the crowd, killing with it about 30 more soldiers. Immediately afterwards, Madara threw himself into melee combat, breaking the bones of his opponents with his blows. 5 minutes later, Uchiha had significantly reduced the number of team members. There were no brave men left to attack him. The soldiers kept their distance from the guy, thus creating a large bloody circle dotted only with corpses around him. Seeing that they were no longer attacking, Madara picked up his bloody scythe, and summoned an equally bloody wolf. Finding his target, the Uchiha said aloud to the squad leader, "If you want me to keep your men alive, come here. You have 10 seconds to think about it." The man swallowed hard, seeing that there was not a scratch on the enemy and that his squad had already lost about 400 soldiers. He got off his horse and headed towards the unknown, all the while thinking, what kind of monster is this, is there such a thing? Stepping over the corpses of his subordinates, the man reached Madara and immediately spoke to him in a trembling voice, "I agree to negotiate. Who are you and what do you want from us?" Bringing his hand to the smiling wolf's head, the guy stared at the man for a few seconds before activating the Sharingan and immersing him in the Genjutsu, beginning the interrogation, "What is your name?" The man answered in a monotone voice, "Liam Weber." Madara, "Are there any mages in your squad?" Liam, "No." Madara, "Any mages you know in the north?" Liam, "No." After thinking for a moment, Madara changed the subject, "Where are you and your squad headed now, and what is your ultimate goal?" Liam, "King of the North, Robb Stark executed Rickard, of House Karstark. Because of this, the Karstark men abandoned Robb's army. House Umber, as an ally of the Starks, sent him 1,500 soldiers and 600 more craftsmen and cooks. We should reach the twins after the wedding of Edmund and Rosalind Frey." After hearing this, Madara asked one last question that interested him, "Do you know anything about a League of Assassins, or any organization of assassins?" Liam, "No." Sighing, the boy stopped the Genjutsu action, and said to the now recovered man, "I found out everything I wanted to know. Now, order your subordinates to give me instructions, or I will kill every one of your squad." Liam's face paled sharply when he saw the boy's demonic scarlet eyes. Taking a small, instinctive step back, he shouted, "I'll resist. Whoever dares to attack this man will be personally executed by me." The soldiers immediately obeyed the order. Looking around thoughtfully, Madara continued walking north, in the direction of the wall. High in the sky, above the battlefield where Madara had killed several hundred soldiers were 2 humanoid creatures, with large black wings and small horns no longer than an index finger. On the left was a man, with a thin sword at his belt, and on the right a woman, with a long staff. Seeing Madara leave, the woman asked her companion, "What do we do with him, Nova?" "Lord Alzik has ordered us to kill this man, but judging by his skills we have seen and the information we received earlier, it will be difficult." The man cast an indifferent look at the woman. "Liz, are you afraid of the man? He is strong, but if we are matched, his elimination will be smooth. We will wait until he moves away from the humans and then we will attack. If the people discover us early, the Lord may have trouble harvesting." Immediately after her words, Nova flew quietly after Madara. The woman stared at her target's back, letting out a small urge to kill. Suddenly, the Uchiha raised his head skyward and looked directly at the woman. The demoness caught her breath, despite being under invisibility. Finding nothing, she continued on her way, but now a smile of anticipation appeared on her face. Chapter 18. Disappointment. Madara and the wolf quietly made their way to the sobbing river, next to the lonely hills. Stopping on the bank, the Uchiha stared into the sky, shouting aloud, "Stop staring, show me. You've been following me for hours." For a couple of seconds nothing happened, but suddenly, 500 meters up, two human figures with large black wings appeared. Slowly descending to the ground, the demonic-looking man drew his rapier from the sheath and pointed it at the boy. "You have the honor of being killed by Lord Mammon's personal order." Immediately after his words, the demoness licked her staff passionately, and said seductively, "What a strong man. It's been a long time since I had one." A strange pink mist began to surround her, spreading around her. Madara looked bewildered at the woman, who curved seductively, touching with her staff places for which it was not meant at all. Seeing that she was not well, the Uchiha turned to the man, who was trying not to look at her. What was wrong with her? The demon gripped the hilt of his rapier tightly, struggling to keep himself under control. Seeing that she wasn't going to respond, the Uchiha averted his gaze back to the demoness, who had begun to undress, determined to up the level of seduction. Slightly relaxed, Madara tilted his head to the side in confusion. "Clowns, are you going to fight?" Silence again. Only the seductive moans of the demoness echoed around him. Sensing that this was some kind of joke, the guy doubled his seal and launched a huge fireball the size of a house out of his mouth towards the two demons. Explosion. The powerful explosion turned the once large green clearing into a huge flaming crater. The surrounding trees and grass burned, creating an image of hell. Madara looked up and saw a burned man holding a woman in his arms. The faces of both no longer looked human, but more like fairy tale demons. The whites of their eyes had turned black and their skin had turned a dull grayish brown. The old smile of expectation appeared on Madara's face. "You have finally shown your true colors. Enough of your idiotic games, attack in earnest." Smiling, Liz asked Nova, "What the hell, why didn't he fall under my seduction magic? No one can resist them but the Lord himself. Not even Alzik can resist her." The man replied irritably to his companion, still glaring at his adversary, "I don't know how I know. Too bad we couldn't get rid of him quietly, but we have to finish him off anyway. Liz, prepare the beam while I distract him." The woman nodded quickly and flew 100 meters upward, proceeding to recite a spell in an unknown language. Around her, purple circles began to appear, with complex pentagrams and hundreds of symbols around each one. As they spoke, Madara drew the bone sword from the scroll and activated the perpetual Mangekyo. Since the rapier could only inflict puncture wounds but not slashing, Uchiha reasoned that a short sword rather than a scythe would be much more effective against such a swift weapon. As the demoness readied herself, the man moved toward his opponent at full speed. In less than a second, Nova covered 100 meters, finding himself facing Madara. Without pausing, he aimed his sword at the heart. Reacting instantly, the boy repelled the blade of his rapier with his kunai, and then, with the hilt of his sword, struck the demon's head, knocking him back several dozen meters before crashing into the rock. Seeing that he was much weaker than he expected, Madara thought with disappointment, looking at the man's bloodied face, "Scanty, he's no stronger than a Junin. I expected more from a demon." Then, the Uchiha looked at the woman who was reading a spell with her eyes closed. Snorting, he formed the upper half of the Susanoo around her, and creating a few Magatama Yasaka in his hand, he fired them at the demoness. There was an explosion, interspersed with lightning discharges. A woman emerged from the cloud of smoke, falling uncontrollably to the ground. Calculating the trajectory, Uchiha nonchalantly threw a kunai with an explosive seal at the demoness. The next moment, Nova flew past the boy at breakneck speed. Before the blade touched the woman's neck, he grabbed her and caught the unconscious woman with the other. The man spread his wings, gliding through the air, but the next second there was another huge explosion. The demons were thrown backwards again by the blast, falling heavily to the ground. Stunned by the explosion, Nova tried to get to his feet, but the man's right arm, as well as his right side, were badly burned. Stepping out in front of the duo, Madara delivered a powerful kick to the demon's jaw, sending him tumbling several dozen meters upwards. Shaking his head in frustration, the Uchiha said, stomping on the woman's head, "Nothing. Is that the best you can do? I'm disappointed in you devils." Struggling to stand up, Nova glared at the boy angrily, "Even if we die here today, that won't save you. We are the weakest among Lord Mammon's subjects." Madara yawned, at the same time pushing his foot on the woman's head. The head burst like a ripe watermelon, staining her shoes. "Let them come, I don't care." Perhaps there is a worthy adversary among them. Seeing his companion's head being mercilessly crushed, the man clenched the hilt of his rapier until it was bloody and rushed into his final fight. Reaching the Uchiha, the demon attempted to pierce his chest, but Madara relaxed to the side, letting the blade pass by. Next, the boy pierced the man's neck with his sword, severing his head. Instant death. The body flew another 5 meters and then fell. White Wolf Power, 90. Abilities: Steel Claws, Tough Hide, Ambush. Blank. Madara Male Guts, 980. Abilities: a lot of them. Blank. Sucker Male Power. Skills: you don't want to know. Blank. Alzak Male Power. Skills. Blank. Ken Female Power. Skills. Blank. Scroop Male Power. Power. Abilities. Blank. Ray Female Power. The Power. Abilities. Blank. Naum Male Power. The Power. Abilities. Blank. Nova Male Power. 450. Abilities: Speed S Regeneration C blank. Liz Female Power, 400. Skills: Seduction SS Lightning Magic Rank A. Chapter 19. The Wall and Mammon's Plan. After Madara's hopes of a good fight were dashed by the impotence of the demons, he summoned a wolf, and without further delay headed north towards the wall. The next 2 days passed more than quietly. There were no attacks from bandits or other demons. On the 4th day of his trek, the Uchiha finally reached the wall. Up close, the structure looked incredible, making Madara unable to believe that mortals had built it. According to the legend Captain Morgan had told him, the wall was built by the first humans, giants and children of the forest, but there was no written confirmation, as writing was not developed 8,000 years ago. Even if Madara created a complete Susanoo, it would still be lower than the wall. By eye, the Uchiha calculated that it must be about 200 meters high and about 50 meters wide. This proved once again that humans could not have built it, especially since it was made of ice instead of the stone or wood that humans could use. Looking first left and then right, Madara whistled, thinking to himself, I couldn't build a wall like that even if I had a Rinnegan. Only with the power of a 10-tailed one could do that, but to make it that long. It would take days to do it. I thought Morgan said he was going from sea to sea. According to the maps, it's about 900 kilometers. Humans definitely couldn't have built it. If the builders of the wall are still alive, we should be more careful behind the wall. They definitely can't be as weak as that pair of demons. With a heavy sigh, he left those thoughts for later, moving on to the more important issue at the moment. Morgan said there were locks on the wall where the Night's Watch lived. So I have to find a way to get people up the wall. I can climb it myself, but what am I supposed to do with this dog? I should have left him with that girl. Although Uchiha could have left him here, but he had spent a lot of time in the jungle training the wolf, so he didn't want to throw him away since he could still be useful. It would also be useful to know from the people on the wall what exactly was on the other side. I needed maps of the area to find a suitable place to train, and it wouldn't hurt to ask about the builders of the wall. Any scrap of information would be useful in his position. Casting a glance at the wolf scampering back and forth, Madara headed east, towards the path that led to the wall. 2 hours later, the boy finally reached the wall. The path did lead up the wall. When he was spotted by the 2 guards guarding the strange device that looked like a wooden elevator, they gripped the hilts of their swords and wanted to say something, but Madara plunged them both into genjutsu, interrupting before one of them could even open his mouth. Approaching one of the guards, he asked him a question, in the familiar pattern, what is the name of this place? The guard replied monotonously, Black Castle. Madara, how many of you are there? Guardian, 86 men. The boy thought for a moment and then asked the question that interested him, why are you here? Sentry, we are guarding the elevator leading to Castle Black at the top of the wall. Madara shook his head, no, why are the Night's Watch here? Sentry, guarding the 7 realms from the savages. Uchiha, who are the savages? Sentinel, descendants of the first humans who live beyond the wall. They raid the northern settlements, so we must repel their attacks before they reach the wall. Madara nodded, satisfied with that answer. Approaching the elevator, he stepped into it with the wolf, and gave the order to the guards, take him up. The man Uchiha was questioning went to the lever and yanked it down. The gears turned and the mechanism worked. The wooden elevator slowly began to rise. An unfamiliar place in Essos. In a ramshackle room, on a huge throne, an old man listened to the report of a silver-haired man with two thin horns on his forehead. Sir, Nova and Liz died in battle with the same man. According to the tracking spell, it happened 200 miles from Winterfell, 2 days ago. Apparently this man is heading north towards the wall. Sizing the man up with a heavy gaze, Mammon muttered, the loss of 2 inferior demons will make no difference. Alzik, how are things in King's Landing? I've given you the last of the demon stones I had in store, have you put them in place? Alzik replied respectfully, I handed them to Kenna and Scroop. They are creating a magic pentagram for absorption. They will place them in the most efficient way, so you don't have to worry. In Winterfell, Pentos, Mur, Valentus, Marine, Cape of Eagles, Riverrun, Highgarden and Castley Rock, the magic pentagrams will also be ready soon. Right now, I am in the process of linking all these staves so that they will be activated simultaneously when the time comes. It will take about 6 more months of preparation. Mammon nodded in satisfaction, good. You did well to create that organization of mortals. They do their job well without asking too many questions. In only 3 years 10 branches have been created, each one in the place we need. Alzik bowed deeply to the old man, it is a pleasure to receive your praise, sir. Today I will send the paired swords to eliminate the foreigner, so that no one else can interfere with you. The high-ranking demons will deal with him quickly. The elder thought for a few seconds and then asked his subordinate, what about the trail of that arrogant bastard? Is there any sign of his arrival in this world? The echoes of divine energy at the transition point must remain if he is already here. Alzik, I scan the world every 6 hours. Apparently it did not follow you to this world, otherwise it would already be here. You probably inflicted serious wounds on him as well, and he's healing them somewhere right now. Mammon clenched his irritated fist with his remaining hand. No. I didn't inflict an injury that would take him that long to recover from. Apparently, he doesn't care about me. As unpleasant as it is, it's for the best. I won't be able to beat him, even after my recovery. I'll have to lay low until they get over themselves. There are too many willing to take his head. Chapter 20. The Road to the Ancient Ruins. Beyond the wall. Madara had no trouble climbing up to Castle Black, where there were only 52 men. Not wanting to waste time with useless bipeds, the Uchiha headed for the highest tower, where the leader of the Black Guard should logically be. That leader turned out to be a decrepit old man of at least 70 years. After immersing the old man in genjutsu, Uchiha questioned him about what was behind the wall, but he didn't learn anything particularly useful as a result. All he saw on the map, and what he learned from the old man, was visible from the wall. A huge snowy forest surrounded by countless mountains. What lay beyond the mountains was practically unknown to the Black Guard, as going there was tantamount to suicide. Thanks to the Sharingan, Madara could see clearly at very far distances, but everything had a limit. His limit was 100 kilometers. After receiving crumbs of useless information from the old man, the Uchiha headed for the elevator to descend to the wild side of the wall. The wolf, like a faithful pet, followed him, although he was shivering all over his body from the cold, as his species lived in a warm climate and his sturdy fur only served as armor, but not as a tool to keep his body warm. In order to keep the white warm, Madara drew a fuinjutsu seal on a strip of fur, and tied it to the wolf's neck to prevent it from freezing to death. The seal was charged with chakra, so it needed a charge, like a phone battery. The boy himself had also put on the same seal. He could simply wrap himself in chakra, as such a small expenditure was almost insensitive to him, but if he was attacked by a strong opponent, he could not afford to warm himself with chakra and concentrate on the fight. Due to the cold, the movement will inevitably slow down, and his body simply will not keep pace with his reactions. After Zetsu's betrayal, Madara became more cautious and began to calm himself in case of unforeseen situations. The place he now found himself in could be as dangerous as the jungle he had lived in for a year. The trek through the snowy forest progressed smoothly. In 3 hours he had not been attacked by a single native beast, and within a radius of 200 meters he had not once perceived a beast larger than a hare. In the Uchiha's opinion, it was natural that there were not many animals in such a harsh climate. The only drawback to their journey was the snow. Because of it, the wolf could not move quickly, so Madara also had to slow down. The place they were heading to was the farthest area from the wall in this valley, which was almost 100 kilometers away. The destination was the ruins of an ancient structure right in the rock, so easily overlooked by the average citizen. There was a possibility that it might serve as a passage to the other side of the ridge. Otherwise, he could stay in those ruins, if the place met the standards for training in hermit mode. After moving almost 40 kilometers away from the wall, Madara encountered his first predator, in this snowy world. It turned out to be a huge polar bear, almost 4 meters long. From the look of the beast it was clear that it was very hungry, and it certainly wasn't going to let a man who had entered its territory for nothing. As the bear began to run towards the Uchiha, he turned his gaze to the wolf and said only one word, "Take it." Obedient to the command, White lunged towards his opponent, and within seconds there was a jaw snapping, along with a loud growl from the two beasts. Both beasts were about the same size, but the bear weighed several times as much, which sent White hurtling backward several feet. The bear continued to advance toward the wolf, pushing the snow aside with its huge carcass. Quickly leaping to his feet, the wolf shook his head to come to his senses. Seeing the bear almost in front of him, he jumped in time to let it pass. Lunging, White leapt into the tree, clawing at the bark. In just 2 jumps, he climbed nearly 20 feet and then leapt over the bear, which was now running toward the tree. Thanks to the acceleration of the fall, the bear was knocked down and the wolf's teeth dug deep into its neck, severing an artery and letting a whole river of blood flow. Madara stood calmly watching the battle between his pet and the local beast. Apparently it's not so useless, though it's still an anchor. At least it will deter the local beast while I'm busy training. Stopping to pay attention to the fighting beasts, he headed towards his destination, slowing down noticeably so that the wolf could catch up with him when he was done. However, if he did not return in 15 minutes, Madara would not return, but would be on his way. After nearly 10 minutes, the bloodied White caught up with Madara. Catching a glimpse of his pet, the boy let out a chuckle, mentally muttering to himself, against a predator twice his weight only to receive a couple of lacerations. Maybe he wasn't that desperate. I hope I can give it to Daenerys for a while until she can deal with the demons. By nightfall, Madara and White had arrived at the ruins of a small fortress on a rock that was at least 8,000 years old. All the mixture of the building had turned to dust and some of the stones had cracked, which was most likely the reason it had collapsed. He had about 30 kilometers to go, but he didn't feel like walking, so he stayed in the tower. Deploying his Fuinjutsu seals, he placed them around the camp so that the local beasts and other critters would not disturb his rest.